Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never should have taken that babysitting job. The moment I stepped into that quiet suburban neighborhood, I felt a chill run down my spine, like icy fingers tracing my vertebrae. But I needed the money, and how bad could one night of watching kids be? The family seemed nice enough when I arrived. Two sweet children, parents headed out for a much-needed date night. Everything was normal, almost too normal. That should have been my first warning. As I waved goodbye to the parents from the porch, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. The neighbor next door was standing in his front yard, motionless, staring directly at me. I offered a polite wave, but he didn't respond, just kept staring. I shrugged it off and went inside to get the kids settled. We played board games, had some snacks, and I tucked them into bed without any fuss. It was shaping up to be an easy night. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping sound coming from the living room window. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Slowly, I crept towards the sound, my fingers trembling as I reached for the curtain. I pulled it back an inch, just enough to peek outside. There he was, the neighbor, standing in the darkness of the yard. His eyes locked onto mine, and a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. I quickly closed the curtain, my breath coming in short gasps. What was he doing? Why was he watching the house? I tried to calm myself down, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just checking on things, making sure everything was okay with the kids. But as the night wore on, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every time I walked past a window, I caught a glimpse of him, sometimes in his yard, sometimes closer to the house, always staring, always with that unsettling smile. I double-checked all the locks, making sure every door and window was secure. The house felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house settling. Around midnight, I heard a noise from the backyard. It sounded like someone was out there, moving around. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, ready to call the police. But what would I say? That the neighbor was standing in his own yard, that I had a bad feeling. I peered out the back window, squinting into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a shadow moved. He was there, right at the edge of the patio. So close I could see the glint in his eyes, reflecting the faint light from the house. My breath fogged up the glass, and I quickly wiped it away, not wanting to lose sight of him. But in that brief moment, he vanished. I blinked, scanning the yard frantically. Where did he go? A floorboard creaked behind me, and I whirled around, my heart in my throat. The house was silent, but the air felt heavy, charged with an unseen tension. I checked on the kids, finding them peacefully asleep, unaware of the terror gripping me. As I closed their bedroom door, I heard it. A soft scraping sound coming from the front of the house. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to investigate. The sound was coming from the front door. Someone was trying to get in. I pressed my eye to the peephole, my whole body trembling. There he was, his face distorted by the curved glass, working on the lock with something in his hand, a credit card, a knife. I couldn't tell. I backed away from the door, panic rising in my chest. This was really happening. I ran to the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find. My palms were sweaty, making the handle slippery in my grasp. The scraping stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then, a new sound. The slow turning of the doorknob. I raised the knife, my arms shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The door began to open, a sliver of moonlight cutting through the darkness of the entryway. A hand appeared in the gap, then an arm. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear, watching helplessly as the intruder pushed his way inside. The neighbor stepped into the house, that same chilling smile plastered on his face. "Hello," he said, his voice oddly calm and friendly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." I found my voice then, a strangled cry escaping my lips. "Get out," I yelled, brandishing the knife. "I've called the police. They're on their way right now." He chuckled, the sound sending shivers down my spine. "No, you haven't," he said, taking a step closer. "I've been watching you all night. I know you haven't called anyone." My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. The kids were upstairs, blissfully unaware of the danger. I had to protect them, but how? "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His smile widened, revealing too many teeth. "I just want to talk," he said, taking another step forward. "Is that so wrong, to want to get to know my neighbors?" I backed up, keeping the knife between us. "Stay back," I warned. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." He laughed then, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, shaking his head. "You're not going to hurt me. You're not going to do anything except listen." Before I could react, he lunged forward, knocking the knife from my hand. It clattered to the floor, sliding under the couch and out of reach. I turned to run, but he grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "Let go of me," I screamed, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would hear. "Shh," he hissed, pulling me closer. "You'll wake the children. We wouldn't want that, would we?" Tears streamed down my face as I struggled against his hold. "Please," I begged. "Just leave. I won't tell anyone, I swear." His free hand came up to stroke my cheek, and I flinched away from his touch. "But I'm not done yet," he whispered. "I've been waiting for this moment for so long, watching, planning, and now, finally, we're alone." A car door slammed outside, and we both froze. Headlights swept across the windows as a vehicle pulled into the driveway. "Looks like our time is up," the neighbor said, sounding genuinely disappointed. "But don't worry, we'll have plenty of other opportunities to chat." He released me, backing towards the door. "This is our little secret," he said, putting a finger to his lips. "If you tell anyone, well, let's just say, I know where you live. Sweet dreams." And with that, he was gone, slipping out into the night just as the parents walked up the front path. I collapsed to the floor, my whole body shaking with sobs. When the parents came in, concern etched on their faces, I managed to pull myself together enough to assure them everything was fine. "Just a scary movie on TV that got to me," I lied. As I drove home that night, constantly checking my rearview mirror, I knew I could never go back to that house. But a part of me wondered if it would matter. The neighbor knew who I was now, and something told me this was far from over. I parked in my driveway, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. As I got out of the car, movement caught my eye. There, across the street, a figure stood in the shadows. That same chilling smile gleamed in the darkness. He had followed me home. The flickering fluorescent lights of the gas station buzzed like angry wasps, casting an eerie glow across the empty parking lot. I never thought the graveyard shift would turn into a real nightmare. But as the bell above the door chimed at 2 a.m., I realized how wrong I was. I'd been working at Pete's Gas and Go for about 6 months, and the night shift was usually uneventful. A few truckers stopping for coffee, maybe some rowdy teenagers buying snacks, nothing I couldn't handle. But this night was different. I felt it the moment he walked in. The man who entered was ordinary enough at first glance. Average height, nondescript clothes, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. But something about the way he moved set my teeth on edge. It was too deliberate, too controlled, like a predator stalking its prey. I plastered on my best customer service smile. "Evening, sir," Can I help you find anything? He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slowly lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine. I felt a chill run down my spine. His gaze was intense, almost feverish, and there was something in it that made my instincts scream danger. "Oh, I'm sure you can help me with a lot of things," he finally said, his voice low and raspy. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those remained cold, calculating. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. "Well, let me know if you need assistance with anything specific." He nodded, then began to wander the aisles. I kept a close eye on him, unable to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. He picked up items seemingly at random. A pack of gum, a lighter, a bottle of water, but never took his eyes off me for long. After what felt like an eternity, he approached the counter. As I began to ring up his items, he leaned in close. Too close. I could smell stale cigarette smoke and something else, something metallic that made my stomach turn. "You work here often?" he asked, his eyes boring into mine. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I focused on bagging his items, trying to ignore how my hands were shaking. "All alone, huh? Must get scary sometimes." I cleared my throat. "It's not so bad. We have security cameras and direct line to the police if needed." I hoped the mention of security would deter whatever he might be planning. He chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Oh, I'm sure you do. But cameras can't stop everything, can they?" My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I finished bagging his items and rattled off the total, praying he'd pay and leave. But he made no move to reach for his wallet. Instead, he placed his hands on the counter, leaning even closer. "You know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been watching this place for a while now. Watching you." Ice flooded my veins. I took a step back, bumping into the cigarette display behind me. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to pay for your items and leave." He ignored me, continuing as if I hadn't spoken. "I've seen you, night after night, all alone in this little glass box, so vulnerable, so tempting." My eyes darted to the panic button under the counter. If I could just reach it without him noticing. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said, his tone hardening. My eyes snapped back to his face, and I saw that his hand was now in his pocket. The implication was clear. He had a weapon. "Please," I whispered, hating how weak my voice sounded. "Just take the money and go. I won't call anyone, I swear." He laughed, then a harsh, grating sound that made me flinch. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not here for money. I'm here for something much more valuable." My mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this situation. The store was empty, the parking lot deserted. It was just me and him, separated by a thin counter that suddenly felt like no protection at all. "What do you want?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I want to play a game, a little test, if you will, to see how well you can follow instructions." Before I could respond, he pulled his hand out of his pocket. I braced myself, expecting to see a gun or a knife. Instead, he was holding a small, innocuous-looking box. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, turning the box over in his hands. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. "This," he said, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone, "is a puzzle box. Very old, very rare. And inside, well, inside is something truly special." He placed the box on the counter between us. "I want you to open it." I stared at the box, then back at him. I don't understand. Why me?" His eyes gleamed with a manic light. "Because, my dear, you've been chosen. And if you refuse, well, let's just say the alternative won't be pleasant for either of us." With shaking hands, I picked up the box. It was heavier than it looked, and covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as I turned it over. How do I open it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. That's for you to figure out. But I'll give you a hint. The price of failure is blood. I felt sick to my stomach, but I knew I had no choice. I began to examine the box more closely, running my fingers over the carvings. As I did, I felt something shift inside. That's it, he urged, his voice filled with an unsettling excitement. Keep going. I continued to manipulate the box, my heart racing with each click and shift. I didn't know what would happen when it opened, but I was certain it wouldn't be good. Suddenly, there was a loud click, and one side of the box sprang open. I yelped in surprise, nearly dropping it. Yes, the man exclaimed, his eyes wide with anticipation. Now reach inside. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the opening. What's in there? His smile turned cruel. Only one way to find out. Taking a deep breath, I plunged my hand into the box. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I grasped it and slowly pulled it out. It was a key, old and ornate. It gleamed dully in the harsh fluorescent light. The man's breath caught in his throat. At last, he whispered, reaching for the key. But as his fingers brushed against it, something extraordinary happened. The key began to glow, growing brighter and brighter until I had to shield my eyes. When the light faded, the man was gone, vanished, as if he'd never been there at all. The only evidence of his presence was the puzzle box and still sitting on the counter. I stood there frozen in shock, the key clutched tightly in my hand. What had just happened? Was I going crazy? The chime of the door snapped me out of my daze. A truck driver walked in, nodding a greeting as he headed for the coffee pot. I quickly shoved the key into my pocket and hid the puzzle box under the counter. As I rang up the truck driver's coffee, my mind raced. Should I call the police? Would anyone even believe me? The rest of my shift passed in a blur. When my replacement arrived at 6 a.m., I practically ran out of the store, the key a heavy weight in my pocket. As I drove home, the events of the night replayed in my mind. The strange man, the puzzle box, the key that made him vanish. It all seemed like a bizarre dream. But as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, parked across the street, was a car I'd never seen before. And in the driver's seat, barely visible in the early morning light, was a figure wearing a baseball cap pulled low over their eyes. I realized with a sinking feeling that my nightmare was far from over. In fact, it might have only just begun. The moment I saw her thumb out on that lonely stretch of highway, I knew I was making a mistake. But it was past midnight. The rain was coming down in sheets, and leaving her there seemed cruel. If only I'd listened to that nagging voice in the back of my mind, maybe I wouldn't be fighting for my life right now. It had been a long day. I was driving back from a business trip, eager to get home and crawl into my own bed. The monotony of the highway had lulled me into a sort of trance, the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the steady hum of tires on wet asphalt becoming a hypnotic lullaby. That's when I saw her, a lone figure illuminated by my headlights, arm outstretched, looking absolutely drenched. I slowed down, my conscience battling with my common sense. In the end, conscience won out. I pulled over, leaning across to roll down the passenger window. Hey, you need a ride? She nodded vigorously, her wet hair plastered to her face. Oh, thank you, yes, please. As she climbed in, I got a better look at her. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with wide, dark eyes that seemed to take up half her face. She was shivering, her thin jacket doing little to protect her from the elements. Where are you headed? I asked, pulling back onto the highway. Just up the road a ways, she said vaguely, rubbing her arms to warm up. There's a town called Millbrook. You know it? I nodded. I'd passed through Millbrook a few times. It was about an hour up the road. Yeah, I can take you there. What's your name? Sarah, she said, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thanks for stopping. I was starting to think I'd be out there all night. No problem, I replied, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my stomach. I'm John, by the way. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the steady patter of rain on the roof and the swish of the wipers. I kept sneaking glances at Sarah out of the corner of my eye. There was something off about her, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. So, what brings you out here in the middle of the night? I asked, trying to break the tension. Sarah stiffened slightly. Oh, just stuff. Stuff? I prodded gently. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. I was visiting my boyfriend. We had a fight. I stormed out, thinking I'd call a cab or something. But my phone died. And, well, here we are. I nodded sympathetically. But something about her story didn't quite add up. We were miles from anywhere. How had she ended up way out here? As if reading my thoughts, Sarah quickly added, I started walking, thinking I'd reach a gas station or something. Guess I went further than I thought. I hummed non-committally, focusing on the road ahead. The rain was getting heavier, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of the car. Mind if I turn on the radio? Sarah asked suddenly. Go ahead, I said, gesturing towards the console. As she fiddled with the dial, I caught a whiff of something strange. It wasn't the musty smell of wet clothes, but something sharper, metallic. It reminded me of... My train of thought was interrupted as Sarah finally settled on a station. The car filled with the sounds of some late-night talk show, the host's voice tinny and distant. So, John, Sarah said, turning to face me. What do you do? I launched into a brief explanation of my job, grateful for the distraction from my unsettling thoughts. But as I talked, I noticed Sarah wasn't really listening. Her eyes were darting around the car, taking in every detail. That's interesting, she said when I finished, her tone making it clear she found it anything but. Hey, do you mind if we make a quick stop? I'm dying for a smoke. I hesitated. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no rest stops or gas stations for miles. I don't think there's anywhere to stop around here, I said carefully. Sarah's demeanor changed in an instant. The friendly facade dropped, replaced by something cold and hard. Pull over, she said, her voice low and threatening. A chill ran down my spine. Look, Sarah, I don't think... I said, pull over. She was shouting now, her face contorted with rage. Heart pounding, I eased the car onto the shoulder of the road. As soon as we came to a stop, Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a knife. Give me your wallet and your phone, she demanded, brandishing the blade. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Sarah, please, you don't have to do this. Shut up, she snarled. Just give me what I want and maybe I won't hurt you. With shaking hands, I reached for my wallet. As I did, Sarah's eyes flickered to the movement, and I saw my chance. In one swift motion, I shoved open my door and tumbled out of the car. I hit the wet asphalt hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. But adrenaline took over, and I scrambled to my feet, running blindly into the darkness. I could hear Sarah behind me, her footsteps splashing through puddles as she gave chase. The rain was relentless, soaking me to the bone and making it hard to see where I was going. My foot caught on something, a root or a rock, I couldn't tell, and I went down hard. Pain shot through my ankle, but I forced myself back up, limping as fast as I could. You can't run forever. Sarah's voice echoed through the night, closer than I'd expected. I veered off the road, plunging into the dense underbrush that lined the highway. Branches whipped at my face as I pushed through, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the dark, rain-soaked forest. Every sound made me jump, certain that Sarah was right behind me, knife in hand. Finally, my legs gave out. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of pursuit, but all I could hear was the steady drip of rain from the leaves above. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of my situation sank in. I was lost in the woods, in the middle of the night, in a rainstorm. My car was who knows where, with my phone and wallet still inside. And somewhere out there, a knife-wielding hitchhiker was looking for me. I allowed myself a moment of despair, burying my face in my hands. How had a simple act of kindness turned into this nightmare? But I couldn't stay here. I had to keep moving, had to find help. Gritting my teeth against the pain in my ankle, I pushed myself to my feet and started walking. I chose a direction at random, hoping it would lead me back to the highway. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds the patter of rain and the squelch of my waterlogged shoes. After what felt like hours, I saw a glimmer of light through the trees. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I quickened my pace, ignoring the protests of my battered body. As I broke through the tree line, I found myself on the shoulder of the highway. In the distance, I could see the welcoming glow of a gas station. Relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I was safe. I could call for help, report Sarah to the police. This nightmare was finally over. But as I limped towards the gas station, a car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and a familiar voice called out, "Need a ride?" My blood ran cold as I turned to see Sarah behind the wheel, my car keys dangling from her finger. "Come on, John," she said, that same cold smile playing on her lips. "Let's finish our trip." As I stood there, frozen in indecision, I realized with a sinking heart that my nightmare was far from over. In fact, it might have only just begun. The old warehouse loomed before me, a hulking silhouette against the night sky. I'd worked the night shift here for months without incident, but tonight, something felt different. The air was heavy, charged with an electricity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I fumbled with my keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My name's Mike, and I'm the night security guard at Riverside Storage and Shipping. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills. Most nights, I just make my rounds, check the cameras, and try not to fall asleep. But tonight was going to be different. I pushed open the heavy metal door, wincing at the loud creak that echoed through the empty building. The sound seemed to hang in the air, amplified by the vast open space. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Get a grip, Mike," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. "It's just another night." I made my way to the security office, my footsteps echoing off the concrete floors. The warehouse was a maze of towering shelves, stacked high with crates and boxes. During the day, it was a hive of activity. But at night, it was a different world entirely. As I settled into my chair in front of the bank of monitors, I couldn't help but feel like something was off. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Or maybe it was the faint whisper of sound that I could never quite place. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "You're letting your imagination run wild," I chided myself. But even as I said it, I couldn't quite convince myself it was true. The first few hours of my shift passed uneventfully. I made my rounds, checked the locks, and monitored the cameras. But as the night wore on, that feeling of wrongness grew stronger. It started with a noise, a soft thud, like something heavy being set down. I froze, my hand hovering over the keyboard where I'd been logging my rounds. I held my breath, straining my ears. There it was again. This time I was sure I hadn't imagined it. I turned to the monitors, scanning each one carefully. Nothing seemed out of place. No movement, no shadows where they shouldn't be. But then, on the camera overlooking the loading dock, I saw it. A flicker of movement. there and gone so fast I almost missed it. My heart began to race. We'd had break-ins before, usually kids looking for a thrill or homeless people seeking shelter. But this felt different. There was a deliberateness to that movement that sent a chill down my spine. I reached for my radio, ready to call for backup, but as my fingers closed around it, the lights flickered and died, plunging the office into darkness. The monitors went dark, leaving me blind. "Shit," I muttered, fumbling for my flashlight. As I clicked it on, the beam illuminated a face just inches from mine. I let out a strangled yell, nearly falling out of my chair as I scrambled backward. But when I shone the light back to where I'd seen the face, there was nothing there. My breath came in short, sharp gasps as I tried to calm my racing heart. "Get it together, Mike," I whispered to myself. "There's nothing there. You're seeing things." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Something was in the warehouse with me. Something that shouldn't be there. With shaking hands, I pulled out my cell phone. No signal. Of course. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had a job to do. I couldn't let my fears get the better of me. Gripping my flashlight tightly, I stepped out of the office and into the cavernous warehouse. The beam of my flashlight seemed pitifully small in the vast darkness. Shadows loomed on all sides, and every creak and groan of the old building made me jump. As I made my way down the main aisle, I heard it again, that soft thud, closer this time. I spun around, my light dancing wildly across the shelves. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure dart between two stacks of crates, but when I looked again, there was nothing there. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and scared in the emptiness. "Is anyone there?" The only response was the echo of my own voice, bouncing back at me from the darkness. I continued my patrol, every sense on high alert. The air felt thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. And all the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I rounded a corner, my light fell on something that made my blood run cold. There, on the concrete floor, was a footprint, but it wasn't like any footprint I'd ever seen before. It was too large, too misshapen to be human. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? What kind of creature could leave a print like that? That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, my light darting frantically from shadow to shadow. And then I saw it. A pair of eyes, glowing in the darkness. They were too high up to be human, and they shone with an intelligence that was decidedly not animal. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. My feet pounding against the concrete as I desperately tried to remember the way out. Behind me, I could hear something moving, its heavy footsteps echoing off the walls. I burst out of the loading dock doors, gasping for air, my lungs burning. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. There, standing in the doorway of the warehouse, was a figure. It was too dark to make out details, but I could see those eyes, still glowing, watching me as I drove away. I never went back to that warehouse. I quit my job the next day, ignoring the confused and concerned questions from my boss. How could I explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? But sometimes, late at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat. The memory of those glowing eyes and that inhuman footprint fresh in my mind. And I wondered, what exactly was in that warehouse? And more importantly, is it still there, waiting in the darkness for its next unsuspecting victim? I've tried to convince myself it was all in my head, a trick of the light, an overactive imagination fueled by too many late nights and too much caffeine. But deep down, I know the truth. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows, just beyond the reach of our understanding. And sometimes, If we're not careful, we stumble upon them in the most unexpected places. So if you ever find yourself working the night shift in an old warehouse, remember my story. And if you hear a strange noise or see a shadow move where no shadow should be, don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just run, and don't look back, because you never know what might be waiting for you in the darkness. The first time I heard the child's cry, I thought I was imagining things. But as I stood there, ear pressed against the locked door, the muffled sob sent chills down my spine. What kind of secret were my new neighbors hiding? I never wanted to be a house sitter, but when my college roommate, Sarah, begged me to watch her aunt and uncle's place for a week, I couldn't say no. They just moved in, she explained, and needed someone to water the plants and feed the cat while they were away on business. Easy money, right? The house was beautiful, I'll give them that. A sprawling Victorian on the outskirts of town, all gabled roofs and intricate woodwork. But from the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the floorboards creaked under my feet, or how the shadows seemed to linger just a little too long in the corners. Or maybe it was the locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway, the one Sarah's aunt had casually mentioned was just storage and strictly off limits. The first few days were uneventful. I went about my duties, watering the countless houseplants and making sure the fat tabby cat Mr. Whiskers and had enough food and water. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was on the third night that I heard it. I was just about to head to bed when a sound caught my attention. At first I thought it was the wind or maybe the house settling. But as I paused at the top of the stairs, I realized it was coming from behind that locked door. A child's cry, faint but unmistakable. My heart began to race. Sarah hadn't mentioned anything about children. As far as I knew, her aunt and uncle didn't have any kids. I approached the door cautiously, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. Pressing my ear against the cool wood, I held my breath and listened. There it was again, a soft whimper, followed by what sounded like words, too muffled to make out. "Hello," I called softly, rapping gently on the door. "Is someone in there?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence. I tried the handle, knowing it was futile. The door remained firmly locked. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the panic rising in my chest. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" No response. I spent the rest of the night pacing, debating what to do. Should I call the police? But what if I was wrong? What if it was just my imagination running wild, fueled by too many late-night horror movies? By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. The house was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows, making the previous night's fears seem silly and overblown. But as I was making my morning coffee, I heard it again. This time it wasn't just crying. It was a voice, clear as day, coming from upstairs. "Help me," it said. "Please help me." I dropped my mug, barely noticing as hot coffee splashed across my feet. I raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time. The voice was coming from behind the locked door, louder now. "Please," it begged. "I'm scared." "I'm here," I called back, jiggling the handle uselessly. "I'm going to get you out, okay? Just hang on." I ran to the garage, searching frantically for something, anything I could use to break down the door. My hands closed around a heavy wrench, and I raced back upstairs. The wood splintered under my frenzied blows, each impact sending shockwaves up my arms. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not with that voice pleading for help on the other side. Finally, with a resounding crack, the door gave way. I stumbled into the room, the wrench clattering to the floor. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was empty, no furniture, no windows, just bare walls and a hardwood floor. And in the center, a small tape recorder, its reels still spinning. I approached it cautiously, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. As I got closer, I could make out words, repeating on a loop. "Help me. Please, help me. I'm scared." The same voice I'd heard, over and over again. I sank to my knees, my head spinning. My head, what was going on? Why would Sarah's aunt and uncle have this? As I knelt there trying to make sense of it all, something caught my eye. A small seam in the floorboards, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. With trembling hands, I pried it open. Inside was a stack of papers, news clippings, photographs, and what looked like official documents. As I leafed through them, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Missing children, spanning decades. And in each case, Sarah's aunt and uncle had lived nearby. My stomach lurched as I realized the implications. This wasn't just some sick joke or art project. This was evidence. Evidence of something far more sinister than I could have imagined. I scrambled for my phone, ready to call the police when I heard it. The front door opening, followed by footsteps on the stairs. "Hello?" Sarah's aunt's voice called out. "We're home early. Is everything okay?" We heard a noise. Panic seized me. They weren't supposed to be back for days. What were they doing here? I shoved the papers back into the hiding spot, my mind racing. I had to get out, had to get help. But how? The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear them in the hallway now. Oh my. Sarah's uncle's voice this time, closer than I'd expected. What happened to the door? I looked around frantically, searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. No windows, no other doors. I was trapped. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. I could see their shadows in the hallway, looming ominously. "Sweetie," Sarah's aunt called, her voice sickly sweet. "Are you in there? Come on out. We just want to talk." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I pressed myself against the wall, praying for a miracle. Now, Sarah's uncle said, his tone menacing despite the light words. "There's no need to be afraid. We can explain everything." I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. I knew that if they found me in here, with the door broken down and their secrets exposed, I wouldn't be leaving this house alive. The floorboards creaked as they entered the room. I could hear them moving around, their breathing heavy in the small space. Come out, wherever you are," Sarah's aunt sing-songed, her voice sending chills down my spine. I held my breath, pressing myself further into the corner. Maybe if I stayed perfectly still, they wouldn't see me. Maybe I could find a way out of this nightmare. But as I felt a hand close around my arm, I knew my luck had run out. "Found you," Sarah's uncle whispered, his breath hot on my ear. I screamed, the sound echoing off the bare walls. But I knew, with a sinking heart, that no one would hear me. No one would come to save me. As they dragged me out of the room, I caught one last glimpse of the tape recorder, still playing its haunting message. "Help me, please, help me. I'm scared." I realized, with a jolt of horror, that soon those words might be my own. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Sarah's aunt's face, twisted into a grotesque smile. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said. "You're going to be with us for a very long time." And then, mercifully, I knew no more. The flickering firelight cast long dancing shadows on the cabin walls, and for a moment I thought I was hallucinating. But as the chanting grew louder, I realized with horror that what I was witnessing was all too real. How could a simple hiking trip have led me to this nightmare? It had started as a perfect day for a hike. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and the trail promised breathtaking views of the mountains. I'd packed light, just some water, trail mix, and my trusty camera. Photography was my passion, and I was hoping to capture some stunning landscapes. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the trail became less defined. I should have turned back then, but the allure of unexplored territory was too strong. I pushed on, my camera clicking away as I captured the raw beauty of the untamed forest. It was late afternoon when I realized I was lost. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. I tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. An endless sea of green and brown. Panic started to set in as darkness fell. The forest, once beautiful and inviting, now seemed menacing. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, set my heart racing. I was fumbling with my phone, trying to get a signal, when I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. Relief washed over me. Civilization, maybe a ranger station or a campsite. I stumbled towards the light, my exhaustion forgotten in the rush of hope. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a building, but a clearing. And in that clearing stood a cabin, old and weather-beaten, but undeniably occupied. Warm light spilled from its windows, and I could hear voices inside. I approached cautiously, rehearsing my plea for help in my head. But as I reached the edge of the clearing, something made me stop. The voices I'd heard weren't engaged in normal conversation. They were chanting, a low, rhythmic sound that sent chills down my spine. Curiosity overrode my caution. I crept closer, staying low and hidden in the underbrush. Through a grimy window, I could see inside the cabin. What I saw made my blood run cold. A group of people, maybe a dozen, stood in a circle. They wore dark robes, their faces obscured by deep hoods. In the center of the circle was some kind of altar, and on that altar, I stifled a gasp. There was a person on the altar bound and struggling weakly. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, and one of the robed figures raised a knife, its blade glinting in the firelight. I scrambled backwards, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they must be able to hear it. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, only in movies or nightmares. But the scene before me was undeniably real. I had to get out of there, had to find help. But as I turned to flee, my foot caught on a root. I went down hard, unable to stop the cry of pain that escaped my lips. The chanting stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, a voice from inside the cabin. "Someone's out there." Panic gave me strength. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not caring about the noise I was making. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. The forest that had seemed so oppressive before now became my only hope for survival. I ran blindly through the darkness, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. The voices behind me grew closer. They knew these woods better than I did, and they were gaining. A beam of light cut through the darkness. They had flashlights. I veered off in a new direction, praying I could lose them. My foot caught on something, a root or a rock. I couldn't tell, and I went down hard. Pain shot through my ankle, and I bit back a scream. I tried to get up, but my leg wouldn't support my weight. I dragged myself behind a large tree, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. The voices were closer now. I could make out words, spread out. The intruder couldn't have gone far. "We can't let them escape. You know what's at stake." I pressed myself against the rough bark of the tree, willing myself to become invisible. The beam of a flashlight swept past, inches from my hiding spot. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. For what felt like hours, I stayed there, frozen in terror. The searchers moved back and forth through the woods, their lights dancing between the trees. Several times, they passed so close I could have reached out and touched them. Gradually, the voices grew more distant. They were moving away, further into the forest. As silence fell once more, I allowed myself to breathe again. I knew I couldn't stay there. Sooner or later, they would double back. My ankle throbbed, but the pain was secondary to the need to escape. Using the tree for support, I pulled myself up. I limped away as quickly and quietly as I could, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every shadow seemed to hide a robed figure, every sound a pursuer closing in. The forest, which hours ago had been a place of beauty and adventure, was now a terrifying maze of potential danger. I don't know how long I walked. Time lost all meaning in the darkness. My world narrowed to the next step, the next tree to hide behind, the next moment of listening for sounds of pursuit. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I heard something that made my heart leap. The sound of traffic, a road. I quickened my pace, hope giving me renewed energy. I broke through the tree line, and there it was, a highway stretching off into the distance. I wanted to cry with relief. I limped to the roadside and stuck out my thumb, praying someone would stop. After what felt like an eternity, a truck slowed and pulled over. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, took one look at my battered, wild-eyed appearance and asked, "Are you okay?" The story poured out of me in a rush. The hike, getting lost, the cabin in the woods, the robed figures, the chase. As I spoke, I realized how insane it all sounded. The driver listened with growing concern, and I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Look," he said gently when I finished, "why don't I take you to the hospital? You've had a rough night, and that ankle needs looking at." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. As we drove away, I looked back at the forest. In the morning light, it looked peaceful, even inviting. Had it all been a hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion? But then, just for a moment, I thought I saw a figure at the edge of the trees, a figure in a dark robe, watching the road. I blinked, and it was gone. At the hospital, they treated my ankle and checked me for a concussion. The police came to take my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. No cabin was found in the area I described. No evidence of any cult activity. Eventually, they chalked it up to an overactive imagination and the effects of being lost in the woods at night. Even I began to doubt my own memories. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of that eerie chanting echoing in my ears. And I wonder, what if it was real? What if they're still out there hidden in the dark heart of the forest waiting for their next victim? One thing's for certain, I'll never go hiking alone again. Some things are better left undiscovered, some mysteries better left unsolved, and some parts of the wilderness should remain forever unexplored. The first flash of headlights in my rearview mirror didn't worry me. The second one made me uneasy. But when the car behind me started honking and flashing its high beams, I knew this wasn't just another impatient driver. This was the beginning of the most terrifying night of my life. It had been a long day, and I was eager to get home. The clock on my dashboard read 11:23 p.m. as I cruised down the empty highway, the rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt lulling me into a sense of calm. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of black cutting through the darkness, illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional street lamp. I first noticed the car about 10 minutes into my drive, just a pair of headlights in the distance, nothing unusual. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized it was getting closer, much closer, and fast. I glanced at my speedometer. I was already going 5 over the limit. Shrugging, I moved into the right lane to let them pass, but they didn't pass. Instead, the car matched my speed, staying right on my tail. That's when the honking started. Short, aggressive bursts that made me jump in my seat. I checked my mirrors, wondering if maybe I had a tail light out or something hanging off my car. But everything looked normal. The high beams came next, flooding my car with harsh white light. I squinted, my eyes watering from the glare. What was this person's problem? I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us. The car behind me accelerated too, staying close enough that I couldn't even see its headlights anymore. Just that blinding glare. My heart began to race. This wasn't normal behavior. Something was wrong, very wrong. I fumbled for my phone, thinking to call 911, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't unlock the screen. Plus, out here in the middle of nowhere, who knew how long it would take for help to arrive? The car behind me suddenly swerved into the left lane. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. They were finally going to pass me. But instead of speeding by, they pulled up alongside me. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, afraid to look. But curiosity got the better of me, and I snuck a glance. The driver's side window was down, and a man was leaning out. Even in the dim light, I could see the manic grin on his face. He was shouting something, but I couldn't hear over the rush of wind and my own pounding heart. Then I saw what he was holding. A gun. Panic exploded in my chest. This wasn't road rage. This was something much, much worse. I slammed on the gas pedal, my old sedan protesting as I pushed it to speeds it was never designed for. The man's car fell behind for a moment, but quickly caught up. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't outrun them, that much was clear. Their car was newer, faster, and I had no idea how much farther it was to the next town. I saw a sign for an upcoming exit. Without thinking, I swerved across 2 lanes, taking the off-ramp at a speed that made my tires squeal. In my rearview mirror, I saw the other car overshoot the exit. A small victory, but I knew it wouldn't last long. The exit led to a maze of back roads. I took random turns, hoping to lose my pursuer. Left, right, another right. I had no idea where I was going, but anywhere was better than that highway. For a few blessed minutes, I thought I'd lost them. The roads were dark and empty, nothing but fields and the occasional farmhouse in sight. I began to relax, my death grip on the steering wheel loosening slightly. Then I saw them. Headlights in my rearview mirror, closing fast. How had they found me? It was like they could sense where I was going. Like this was all some sick game to them. I took more turns, each one more desperate than the last, but they stayed with me, always right behind. The sound of their engine was a constant roar in my ears, drowning out everything else. I was so focused on what was behind me that I almost missed the barricade ahead. Construction. The road was closed. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop just inches from the barrier. I was trapped. The other car pulled up behind me, blocking any chance of backing up. The driver got out, that same maniacal grin on his face. In his hand, the gun glinted in the moonlight. This was it. This was how it ended. On some nameless back road in the middle of nowhere. I closed my eyes, waiting for the sound of gunshots. But instead I heard laughter. My eyes snapped open. The man was doubled over, laughing so hard he was having trouble standing up. As I watched, dumbfounded, he lowered the gun. It was plastic. A toy. Oh man, he wheezed, still chuckling. You should see your face right now. Confusion replaced fear. What was going on? Then another car pulled up, and another. People started getting out, all of them laughing and chatting like this was some kind of party. One of them approached my car. As he got closer, I recognized him. It was my brother. "Happy birthday, sis," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "Gotcha good, didn't we?" It all came crashing down on me at once. The chase, the gun, all of it. It had been a prank. An elaborate, terrifying prank. I got out of the car on shaky legs, torn between relief and fury. "What the hell were you thinking?" I shouted, my voice hoarse from fear. My brother's smile faltered. "We thought it would be fun, you know, an exciting way to kick off your 30th birthday. We didn't mean to scare you so badly." I looked around at the group. There were about a dozen people, all friends and family. They were holding balloons and gifts, looking increasingly uncomfortable as they realized how badly their surprise had gone. "Fun," I said, my voice rising. "You call that fun? I thought I was going to die." The man who had been chasing me, now I recognized him as my brother's best friend, stepped forward. "We're really sorry," he said, looking genuinely remorseful. "We didn't think it through. We just wanted to give you a birthday you'd never forget." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "Mission accomplished." There was an awkward silence. Then, slowly, the absurdity of the situation began to sink in. Here we all were, standing on a closed road in the middle of the night, surrounded by balloons and birthday gifts. All because of a prank gone horribly wrong. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. Before I knew it, I was giggling uncontrollably. The tension broke, and soon everyone was laughing. "You idiots," I said, wiping tears from my eyes. "You absolute morons. Who planned something like this?" My brother shrugged, looking sheepish. "We may have gotten a bit carried away," he admitted. "A bit." I shook my head, but I was smiling now. This is officially the worst and best birthday surprise ever. We ended up having an impromptu party right there on the closed road. Someone had brought cake, and we sat on the hoods of our cars, eating and laughing about the insanity of the night. As I looked around at my friends and family, I felt a surge of affection. Yes, their plan had been monumentally stupid. Yes, they had scared me half to death. But in a weird way, it showed how much they cared, how far they were willing to go to make my birthday special. "Next year," I said, raising my piece of cake and a toast. "Maybe just stick to a surprise party at home, okay?" Everyone laughed and agreed. As we packed up to head home, I couldn't help but smile. It had been a terrifying, exhilarating, unforgettable night. And isn't that what birthdays are supposed to be about? But as we drove home, I made a mental note. Next year, I'm staying in on my birthday, just in case. The day I realized my neighbor was watching me, I laughed it off. A month later, I was boarding up my windows. Now, as I sit here in the dark, jumping at every sound, I wonder how my life became a living nightmare. It all started innocently enough. I had just moved into a quaint little house in what I thought was a peaceful suburb. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and kids play in the streets until dusk. My neighbor, let's call him Tom, seemed friendly at first. He welcomed me to the neighborhood with a homemade pie and offered to mow my lawn until I got settled in. I was grateful for the warm welcome. Being new in town and working from home, I didn't have many opportunities to meet people. So when Tom invited me over for a barbecue that weekend, I happily accepted. The barbecue was odd. Tom lived alone, but his house was immaculate, almost sterile. Family photos lined the walls, but they all seemed to be at least a decade old. As he grilled, he peppered me with questions about my life, my job, my routine. I chalked it up to neighborly curiosity and answered politely. It was when I was leaving that I first felt a twinge of unease. As I thanked him for dinner, his eyes seemed to bore into me. "I'm so glad you moved in," he said, his grip on my hand a little too tight, a little too long. "We're going to be great friends." Over the next few weeks, I started noticing Tom more and more. He was always outside when I left for my morning run. He'd wave from his yard as I drove home from the grocery store. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. But then I realized he was learning my routine. One morning, I decided to skip my run. I peeked out the window at my usual departure time, and there was Tom, pacing in his driveway, checking his watch. My blood ran cold. This wasn't friendliness, this was surveillance. From that day on, I started paying closer attention. I noticed Tom's curtains twitching whenever I was in my front yard. His car would mysteriously appear behind me on my rare trips into town. Once, I could have sworn I saw a flash of light from his upstairs window, like the glint of binoculars or a camera lens. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Tom was just a lonely old man with nothing better to do. But the feeling of being watched, of being studied, grew stronger every day. Things escalated when I started dating someone. The first night my date dropped me off, I found my flower pots overturned the next morning. When he stayed over, all 4 of my car tires were slashed. There was no proof it was Tom, but I knew. Somehow, I just knew. I installed security cameras, but they mysteriously malfunctioned after just a few days. I called the police, but without concrete evidence, and they couldn't do anything. Just a neighborly dispute, they said. If only they knew. Tom's behavior became more erratic. He'd stand at the property line for hours, just staring at my house. I'd wake up to find bizarre gifts on my porch, dead flowers, rocks arranged in strange patterns, once even a bird's nest with a single blue egg. I stopped leaving my house except for absolute necessities. I worked with the curtains drawn, jumped at every creak and groan of the house. My friends stopped visiting because Tom would interrogate them in the driveway. I was a prisoner in my own home. The final straw came last week. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound in my bedroom. There, silhouetted in the doorway, was a figure, Tom's figure. I screamed, and he vanished. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The police came, but again, there was no proof. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing. They suggested I was having nightmares due to stress, but I knew the truth. Tom had been in my house, in my bedroom, while I slept. That's when I snapped. I went to the hardware store and bought every lock, every security device they had. I boarded up my windows, installed a steel security door. My house became a fortress. But even now, huddled in my living room with a baseball bat across my knees, I don't feel safe, because I know Tom is out there, watching, waiting. I can hear him sometimes, whispering through the cracks in the boards. "Let me in," he says. "We're friends, remember? Such good friends." I haven't slept in days. I can't eat. I jump at every sound, convinced it's Tom finding a way in. The police won't help. My family thinks I'm having a breakdown. Maybe I am. But if I am, it's because of him. Because of Tom. Yesterday, I found a note pushed under my door. "You can't hide forever," it said. "I'll always be watching." I don't know what to do. I can't live like this anymore. But I can't leave either. This is my home, my life. And Tom has taken it all. As I sit here in the dark, I wonder how much longer I can hold out. How long before Tom finds a way in, or before the isolation and fear drive me truly mad. I hear a noise outside, footsteps on the porch, a scratching at the door. Is it Tom? Or am I finally losing my grip on reality? The scratching gets louder, more insistent. I raise my bat, ready to defend myself. But against what? A real intruder, or the monsters my mind has created. The door handle jiggles. My heart is pounding so hard I can barely breathe. This is it? The moment I've been dreading and anticipating for months. The door begins to open, and I see a figure in the doorway. But it's not Tom. It's me. I blink, and the other me is gone. The door's closed. The house is silent. What's happening to me? Am I going insane? Or is this Tom's final, cruel trick? I don't know how much longer I can last. The lines between reality and paranoia have blurred beyond recognition. Is Tom really watching me? Or have I created this entire nightmare in my own mind? As another night falls, I huddle deeper into my fortress. But I know the truth now. The real prison isn't my boarded-up house. It's my own mind. And I fear that's one lock Tom has already picked. So I wait, bat in hand, for whatever comes next. For Tom, for madness, for an end to this waking nightmare. Because anything, even the monster I've imagined Tom to be, would be better than this limbo of fear and doubt. The scratching starts again. But this time, I don't know if I'll answer. Maybe it's better not to know. Maybe it's better to just sit here in the dark, watching the shadows, until the line between watcher and watched disappears completely. After all, isn't that what Tom would want? The old building creaked and groaned like a living thing, but I told myself it was just the wind. That is, until I saw the shadow figure gliding down the hallway, right through the wall. That's when I realized this night shift was going to be anything but ordinary. My name's Alex, and I've been working as a night security guard at Oakwood Manor for about 3 months now. It's an imposing old building, all Victorian architecture and faded grandeur. It's been converted into office spaces. During the day, it's a bustling hive of activity, but at night, it's a different world entirely. When I first took the job, I was just grateful for the steady paycheck. The night shift suited me fine. I've always been a bit of a night owl anyway. And for the first few weeks, everything was normal, boring even. I'd make my rounds, check the security cameras, and count down the hours until my shift ended. But then the strange thing started happening. It began with small things, items moving on their own. Doors I'd swear I'd locked found wide open. The temperature dropping suddenly in certain rooms, cold spots that would appear and disappear without reason. I tried to rationalize it all. Old building settle. The heating system was probably on the fritz. My mind was playing tricks on me in the quiet of the night. But then I saw it. The shadow. I was making my usual rounds, flashlight in hand, when movement caught my eye at the end of the long hallway on the 3rd floor. I froze, my beam of light cutting through the darkness. There, just for a moment, I saw a dark figure. It was humanoid in shape, but somehow wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving with a fluidity that seemed impossible. And then, right before my eyes, it passed through the solid wall at the end of the corridor. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. What had I just seen? It couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a tree outside the window. Anything but what my mind was screaming it was. A ghost. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Ghosts weren't real. I was a rational person. There had to be a logical explanation. But from that night on, the occurrences became more frequent, more difficult to explain away. I'd hear whispers in empty rooms, see figures out of the corner of my eye that would vanish when I turned to look. The security cameras would glitch, showing impossible things, furniture moving on its own, doors opening and closing without anyone there. I thought about quitting, but something kept me coming back night after night. Curiosity, maybe, or perhaps a deeper need to understand what was happening. One night, about a month after I first saw the shadow figure, I decided to do some digging. During a quiet moment in my shift, I pulled up the building's history on my phone. What I found chilled me to the bone. Oakwood Manor hadn't always been an office building. In the late 1800s, and it had been a private psychiatric hospital, the kind of place where the wealthy would send troublesome relatives to be forgotten. The articles I found spoke of experimental treatments, of patients who went in and never came out. And then there was the fire. In 1904, a blaze swept through the east wing of the building. Official reports said it was an accident, but there were whispers of arson, of a patient driven to desperation by the inhumane conditions. Dozens died that night, trapped in their rooms. As I read the grim details, I realized with a start that the east wing, the part that had burned, was the same section where I'd been experiencing the most paranormal activity. I was so engrossed in my research that I almost missed it. A soft sound, like someone crying. I looked up, my blood running cold. The sound was coming from down the hall, from the room that had once been the head doctor's office. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to stay put in the security office where it was safe. But something pulled me to my feet, drew me towards that sound. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, the crying growing louder with each step. My flashlight beam danced erratically as my hand shook. I reached the door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Slowly, I pushed it open. The room was empty, moonlight spilling in through the large windows. But the air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. And there, in the center of the room, was a figure. It was a young woman, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown. She was translucent, her edges blurring into the moonlight. She turned to face me, and I saw that her eyes were filled with an immeasurable sadness. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "We can't rest. The pain, it never stops." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, to scream, to wake up from this nightmare. But I was rooted to the spot, Unable to look away from her pleading eyes, suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. More figures appeared, their forms flickering like old film. Men, women, children, all bearing the marks of their final moments. Burns, injuries, faces contorted in fear and pain. They swirled around me, their voices rising in a cacophony of pleas and cries. Help us. Make it stop. We're trapped. The temperature plummeted, my breath coming out in visible puffs. Objects began to move, books flying off shelves, chairs scraping across the floor. The windows rattled in their frames, and I was sure they would shatter at any moment. In the midst of the chaos, I saw him, the shadow figure from the hallway. He stood apart from the others, tall and imposing. Unlike the other spirits, he seemed solid, more real somehow. He turned his featureless face towards me, and though he had no eyes, I could feel his gaze boring into me. A voice filled my head, deep and resonant, drowning out the cries of the other spirits. You see us now. You know our pain. Will you help us find peace? I wanted to say no, to run away and never come back, to pretend none of this was real. But as I looked around at the tortured souls surrounding me, I knew I couldn't. Whatever had happened here, whatever pain these spirits were holding on to, it needed to end. With a voice that sounded braver than I felt, I spoke. Yes, I'll help you. Tell me what to do. The chaos subsided. The spirits faded, leaving only the young woman and the shadow figure. The woman smiled, a look of relief washing over her face. Thank you, she whispered, before disappearing like mist in sunlight. The shadow figure remained. He extended a hand towards me, and I felt a jolt of energy course through my body. Suddenly, I knew what I had to do. The next few weeks were a blur. By day, I researched the history of Oakwood Manor, digging deeper than any local historian had before. I uncovered records of mistreatment, of illegal experiments, of lives cut tragically short. By night, I walked the halls of the building, listening to the stories of the spirits, piecing together the truth of what had happened here. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the activity was so intense I thought I'd lose my mind. Nights when the weight of the spirits, pain and anger felt like it would crush me. But I persevered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found what I was looking for. Hidden in the basement, behind a false wall, I discovered a cache of documents. Patient records, experimental logs, and most importantly, a list of names. The true account of who had died in the fire and why. With trembling hands, I brought my findings to light. I contacted the authorities, the media, anyone who would listen. The truth of Oakwood Manor was finally revealed. The night after the story broke, I entered the building for my shift with a sense of trepidation. But as I walked the halls, I felt a difference. The air was lighter, the oppressive energy gone. In the old doctor's office, I found them waiting for me. The spirits, no longer tortured and angry, but peaceful. One by one, they smiled at me, whispered their thanks, and faded away. The shadow figure was the last to go. He placed a hand on my shoulder and I felt a warmth spread through me. You have freed us, his voice echoed in my mind. Our story is told, we can rest now. And then he was gone. I still work at Oakwood Manor. The building is quiet now, just an ordinary office space. But sometimes, when the night is still and the moonlight spills through the windows, I swear I can hear a whisper of thanks on the wind. And I smile, knowing that I helped bring peace to the restless souls of Oakwood Manor. The moment I pulled over to help, I knew something was off. But by the time I realized it was a trap, it was already too late. The click of the gun behind my head told me this night was about to become a fight for survival. It had been a long day, and I was eager to get home. The clock on my dashboard read 11:37 p.m. as I cruised down the lonely stretch of highway. the rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt lulling me into a sort of trance. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of black cutting through the darkness, illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional flicker of stars peeking through the clouds. That's when I saw her, a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, standing next to a car with its hood up. She was waving frantically, her face a mask of desperation in the harsh glare of my headlights. I hesitated for a moment, that little voice in the back of my head warning me about the dangers of stopping for strangers on deserted roads at night. But she looked so helpless, so afraid, I couldn't just drive by. I pulled over, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. As I got out of my car, I called out, "Everything okay?" The woman's relief was palpable. "Oh, thank God," she cried, rushing towards me. "My car just died, and I've been stuck out here for hours. There's no cell service, and you're the first person who's stopped." I nodded sympathetically, already moving towards her car. "Let's take a look. I'm no mechanic, but maybe we can figure out what's wrong." As I leaned over the engine, trying to spot any obvious issues, I heard a noise behind me. Before I could turn, something hard pressed against the back of my head. "Don't move," a gruff male voice commanded. "Hands where I can see them." My blood ran cold as I slowly raised my hands. The woman who had seemed so distressed moments ago now stood before me, a cruel smile twisting her features. In her hand was my wallet. She must have lifted it from my pocket while I was distracted. "Looks like we caught ourselves a live one, Jake," she said, rifling through my wallet. "And he's got cash too. Lucky us." The man behind me, Jake, apparently, chuckled. "All right, friend. Here's how this is going to go. You're going to get in your car and drive us wherever we tell you. Try anything stupid and, well," he pressed the gun harder against my skull. "You get the idea." My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this nightmare. But with a gun to my head and two of them against one of me, my options were limited. Swallowing hard, I nodded. "Smart choice," the woman said. "I'm Lacey, by the way, since we're going to be spending some quality time together." They marched me back to my car, Jake keeping the gun trained on me while Lacey slid into the passenger seat. Jake got in behind me, the barrel of the gun now pressed against my ribs. "Drive," he ordered. "Head north on the highway." As I pulled back onto the road, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I tried to stay calm, to think rationally. There had to be a way out of this. I just had to bide my time, wait for an opportunity. We drove for what felt like hours, the highway giving way to smaller roads, then to unpaved tracks winding through dense forest. Lacey and Jake kept up a steady stream of conversation, talking about past jobs and what they planned to do with the money from this one. I tried not to listen, to focus on the road and on finding a chance to escape. Finally, Jake directed me to pull over next to an old, dilapidated barn. As I cut the engine, dread settled in my stomach like a lead weight. This was it. This was where they were going to kill me. Out of the car, Jake barked, nice and slow. I complied, my legs feeling like jelly as I stepped onto the damp grass. The night was eerily quiet, the darkness absolute save for my car's headlights. Lacey produced a length of rope from somewhere and began tying my hands behind my back. "Can't have you getting any ideas about running off, but," she said, her tone almost cheerful. Once I was secured, Jake lowered the gun. "All right, let's see what goodies our friend here has in his car." As they began ransacking my vehicle, I stood there, heart pounding, desperately trying to think of a way out. The rope around my wrists was tight, but maybe if I could work it loose. Suddenly, a sound cut through the night, distant at first, but growing louder. Headlights appeared on the road we'd just come down. Jake and Lacey froze. "Shit," Jake hissed. "Who the hell is that?" "Doesn't matter," Lacey snapped. "We need to go. Now." In their panic, they seemed to have forgotten about me. As they scrambled to gather what they'd taken from my car, I saw my chance. I ran. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away. I plunged into the forest, branches whipping at my face as I stumbled through the underbrush. Behind me, I could hear Jake and Lacey shouting, their voices filled with rage. A gunshot rang out, the sound echoing through the trees. I ducked instinctively, nearly losing my footing on the uneven ground. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness of the forest. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead. But terror kept me moving. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through me. Finally, when I felt like I couldn't take another step, I saw a light ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was a house. Small, isolated, but gloriously, wonderfully real. I burst out of the tree line, gasping for breath. An old man stood on the porch, a shotgun in his hands. He must have heard the commotion. "Help," I managed to croak out. "Please, they're after me." The old man's eyes widened as he took in my appearance, disheveled, hands bound, wild-eyed with fear. Without a word, he ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. "Martha," he called out, "call the sheriff. We've got trouble." As his wife hurried to the phone, the old man, Bob, I would later learn, quickly untied my hands. I collapsed into a chair, my whole body shaking as the adrenaline began to wear off. "What happened, son?" Bob asked gently. Through gasping breaths, I told him everything, stopping to help, the trap, the terrifying drive, my escape. By the time I finished, I could hear sirens in the distance. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police swarmed the area, taking my statement and searching for Jake and Lacey. They found my car abandoned by the old barn. But of my attackers, there was no sign. As dawn broke, I sat on Bob and Martha's porch, a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of coffee warming my hands. A police officer approached, a grim look on his face. "We found them," he said. "Crashed their getaway car about 10 miles down the road. Both dead on impact." I nodded, not sure how to feel. Relief, certainly, that they couldn't hurt anyone else. But also a deep, bone-weary sadness at the waste of it all. The officer hesitated, then added, "You should know, we think these two were responsible for a string of similar attacks in the area. 3 people dead, 2 still missing. Your escape. You may have saved more lives than just your own." As he walked away, I stared out at the forest, now bathed in the soft light of dawn. The nightmare was over, but I knew the memory of this night would stay with me forever. I thought about how close I'd come to death, how easily my desire to help had been turned against me. But I also thought about Bob and Martha, how they'd taken in a stranger in need without hesitation. In the end, I realized that's what it comes down to. In a world where darkness can find you on a lonely stretch of highway, it's the light of human kindness that sees us through. And despite everything, I knew that the next time I saw someone in need on the side of the road, I'd still stop to help. But maybe, just maybe, I'd be a little more cautious about it. The first red flag should have been the locked door in the basement. The second was the strange symbols etched into the walls. But it wasn't until I found the hidden room filled with horrifying artifacts that I realized this Airbnb stay was going to be my last. I'd booked the place on a whim, needing a weekend getaway from the stress of city life. The listing promised a quaint cottage in the woods, perfect for unwinding and reconnecting with nature. The price was surprisingly low for such a picturesque spot, but I chalked it up to it being off-season. As I drove up the winding dirt road, the dense forest pressing in on both sides, I felt a mixture of excitement and unease. The cottage, when it finally came into view, was everything the pictures had promised. A charming 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and shuttered windows. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Margaret, met me at the door. She had a warm smile, but something about her eyes seemed off, too intense maybe. She gave me a quick tour, rattling off information about the property and the surrounding area. "Oh, and don't worry about the basement door," she said casually as we passed it. "It's just storage, nothing interesting down there." I nodded, not thinking much of it at the time. She handed me the keys, reminded me to call if I needed anything, and left. As her car disappeared down the driveway, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. A whole weekend to myself, no work, no responsibilities, just peace and quiet. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. I unpacked, made a cup of tea, and settled onto the porch with a book. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. It was exactly what I needed. As evening fell, I headed inside to make dinner. That's when I noticed the first truly odd thing. The kitchen drawers were all locked, every single one. I frowned, jiggling the handles. Why would someone lock kitchen drawers? I shot Margaret a quick text, asking about it. Her reply came almost instantly. "Oh, silly me. I must have forgotten to unlock those. The key should be in the junk drawer by the fridge." Sure enough, I found a small key that opened all the drawers. But as I rummaged through them for a can opener, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The contents seemed staged somehow, like a model home kitchen rather than one that was actually used. I pushed the thought aside and focused on making my dinner. But as I ate, my eyes kept drifting to that basement door. What kind of storage needed a padlock that heavy? After dinner, I decided to explore the cottage a bit more. The living room was cozy, with a stone fireplace and shelves lined with books. But as I ran my fingers along the spines, I realized something strange. All the books were backwards, their pages facing out instead of their titles. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled one out and opened it. The pages were blank, every single one. I checked another book, and another, all blank. A chill ran down my spine. This was beyond weird. It was downright creepy. I headed upstairs, suddenly eager to make sure the bedroom was normal. It looked fine at first glance, a large bed, a dresser, a closet. But when I opened the closet door, my breath caught in my throat. The back wall of the closet was covered in strange symbols, etched deeply into the wood. They looked ancient, like something out of an occult textbook. And in the center of it all was a phrase repeated over and over. "The doorway must remain closed." My heart was pounding now. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I needed to leave, to get out of here right now. I turned to grab my bag, and that's when I saw it. A dark stain on the hardwood floor, partially hidden under the rug. With shaking hands, I pulled the rug back. The stain was larger than I thought, and unmistakably blood. Panic surged through me. I ran downstairs, fumbling for my phone. No signal, of course. I was halfway to the front door when a thought stopped me cold. My car keys. Where were my car keys? I searched frantically, emptying my pockets, checking every surface. They were gone. And then I remembered. I'd left them in the dish by the door when I came in. The dish that was now empty. A sound from outside made me freeze. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The basement. If I could get down there, maybe there was another way out. I ran to the basement door, my fingers clumsy as I worked on the padlock. Just as I heard the front door start to open, the lock clicked open. I yanked the door open and plunged into the darkness, pulling it shut behind me. The basement was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, using its feeble light to illuminate my surroundings. What I saw made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in the same symbols I'd seen in the closet, but here they were everywhere, floor to ceiling. Strange artifacts cluttered every surface. Bones, feathers, crystals arranged in intricate patterns. And in the center of the room, a large stone altar. Dark stains marred its surface. This wasn't a basement. It was a ritual chamber. The sound of the basement door opening snapped me back to reality. Footsteps on the stairs, slow and steady. "I see you found my little secret." Margaret's voice floated down, eerily calm. "I do wish you hadn't done that. It makes things Complicated. I backed away, my eyes darting around for a weapon, an escape route, anything. You don't understand, she continued, her footsteps drawing closer. The doorway must remain closed, and for that, sacrifices must be made. My back hit a wall. There was nowhere left to run. Margaret stepped into the light of my phone. In her hand was a long, curved knife. Her eyes, when they met mine, were completely black. I am sorry about this, she said, not sounding sorry at all. But you'll be serving a greater purpose. The old ones must be appeased. As she raised the knife, time seemed to slow down. In that moment of clarity, I saw my only chance. Next to me was a shelf laden with candles and incense. With all my strength, I shoved it towards her. Margaret stumbled back, momentarily distracted. I didn't waste a second. I ran past her, taking the stairs two at a time. Behind me, I could hear her angry shouts, her footsteps pounding up the stairs. I burst out of the basement, slamming the door shut and jamming a nearby chair under the handle. It wouldn't hold her for long, but it might buy me enough time. I ran for the front door, yanking it open and sprinting into the night. The forest was dark, the trees looming ominously on all sides. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Only then did I dare to look back. The cottage was no longer in sight, swallowed up by the darkness of the forest. But I could hear something. Chanting, carried on the wind. And underneath it, a deeper sound, like the rumbling of the earth itself. I kept moving, stumbling through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I had no idea where I was going, only that I had to get away. After what felt like hours, I saw lights in the distance, a highway, civilization. As I broke through the tree line, a car was passing by. I waved my arms frantically, probably looking like a madman, but the driver must have seen the terror in my eyes because they stopped. I babbled out my story as they drove me to the nearest police station. The officers listened skeptically but agreed to check it out. They found nothing. The cottage was gone, the entire clearing empty as if nothing had ever been there. The Airbnb listing had vanished. Even my booking confirmation had disappeared from my email. If it weren't for the scratches on my arms and the leaves in my hair, I might have thought I'd imagined the whole thing. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear that chanting on the wind. And I know that somewhere out there, Margaret is still waiting. The doorway must remain closed, and the old ones must be appeased. I don't use Airbnb anymore. Some risks aren't worth taking, no matter how good the deal seems. Because you never know when your relaxing getaway might turn into a fight for survival, against forces beyond your understanding. The moment he slid into the back seat of my car, I knew something was off. His eyes were wild, darting around like a cornered animal. But it wasn't until he pressed the cold metal of a gun against my ribs that I realized this wasn't going to be just another late-night Uber ride. My name's Mike, and I've been driving for Uber for about 6 months now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gives me the flexibility I need while I finish my degree. Most nights are pretty uneventful. Drunk college kids, couples coming home from date night, the occasional businessman working late. But this night was different. It started like any other pickup. My phone pinged with a ride request from a guy named Alex, and I headed to the address. It was a quiet residential street, dimly lit and eerily empty for a Friday night. As I pulled up, I saw him step out from between two parked cars. He was average height, wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face. Nothing too out of the ordinary, I thought. How wrong I was. As soon as he got in, the air in the car changed. It felt charged, dangerous. Before I could even ask his name to confirm the ride, I felt it, the unmistakable pressure of a gun barrel against my side. "Drive," he said, his voice low and tight with tension. "And don't try anything stupid." My mouth went dry, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. With shaking hands, I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. Where are we going?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just drive," he snapped. "I'll tell you when to turn." We drove in tense silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and my own ragged breathing. My mind was racing, trying to figure a way out of this nightmare. Should I try to signal another driver? Make a break for it at a red light? But every time I thought I saw an opportunity, I felt that gun press harder into my side, a silent reminder of the very real danger I was in. After about 20 minutes of aimless driving, he finally spoke again. "Pull over here." We were on a quiet stretch of road, bordered by dense woods on one side and an empty field on the other. As I brought the car to a stop, I braced myself for the worst. This is it, I thought. This is where it ends. But instead of demanding money or worse, he did something unexpected. He started talking. "I didn't want to do this, you know," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't have a choice." I remained silent, afraid that saying the wrong thing might set him off. "They took her," he continued. "My little girl. Said if I didn't do exactly what they said, I'd never see her again." Despite my fear, I felt a pang of sympathy. If he was telling the truth, this man wasn't just a criminal. He was a desperate father. "Who took her?" I asked cautiously. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Who do you think? The people you don't say no to. The ones who own this city." I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who he meant. Our city had been in the grip of a powerful crime syndicate for years. Everyone knew about it, but no one talked about it. Not if they wanted to stay safe. What do they want you to do?" I asked, dreading the answer. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They want me to kill someone important, and you're going to drive me there." My blood ran cold. This was so much worse than I had imagined. I wasn't just a victim of a random crime. I was being dragged into something much bigger, much more dangerous. "Please," I said, hating how my voice shook. "I can't be involved in this. I have a family, a life. If they find out I helped." "You think I don't?" He cut me off, anger and desperation bleeding into his voice. "You think I want to do this? But if I don't, my daughter dies. And if you don't help me, you die. Right here. Right now." To emphasize his point, he pressed the gun harder into my side. I flinched, my mind reeling. There had to be a way out of this, for both of us. What if we went to the police?" I suggested hesitantly. "Surely they could help." He laughed again, that same bitter sound. "The police. Half of them are on the syndicate's payroll. The other half are too scared to do anything. No, there's no help coming. It's just you and me." We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of our shared predicament hanging heavy in the air. I knew I should be trying to figure a way out, to save myself. But all I could think about was this man's daughter, scared and alone, waiting for her father to save her. Finally, I made a decision. It was probably the stupidest, most reckless decision of my life. But in that moment, it felt like the only choice. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll help you. But we do this my way." He seemed taken aback by my sudden change of heart. "What do you mean, your way?" I took a deep breath. "I mean, we're not going to kill anyone. We're going to save your daughter. And we're going to do it without bloodshed." For a long moment, he was silent. Then, slowly, I felt the pressure of the gun ease away from my side. "How?" he asked. And for the first time, I heard a glimmer of hope in his voice. I didn't have a plan. Not really. But as I started talking, ideas began to form. "First, we need more information. Who's the target? Where is your daughter being held? The more we know, the better chance we have." Over the next few hours, as we drove around the city under the cover of darkness, Alex, I learned that was his real name, filled me in on the details. The target was a district attorney who had been building a case against the syndicate. His daughter was being held in a warehouse on the outskirts of town. We had until dawn to complete the mission. It was a crazy plan we cobbled together. Using my knowledge of the city from my time as an Uber driver and Alex's inside information, we managed to create a diversion at the warehouse. While the guards were distracted, we slipped in and found his daughter, terrified but unharmed. The reunion between father and daughter brought tears to my eyes, but we weren't out of danger yet. We still had to deal with the threat to the DA's life. In the end, it was Alex who came up with the solution. He had recorded every conversation with the syndicate members who had orchestrated this plan. With his daughter safe, he was willing to turn state's evidence. We drove straight to the DA's house, arriving just as the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon. It took some convincing, but when the DA heard our story and saw the evidence Alex had, he immediately called in a team of trusted officers. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, witness protection arrangements, and media frenzy as the story broke. The syndicate's grip on the city was finally broken, all because of one desperate father and an Uber driver who decided to take a chance. As for me, I've hung up my Uber keys for good. Alex and his daughter are safe in witness protection, and I've been hailed as a hero, though I don't feel like one. The DA even offered me a job on his security team, which I'm considering. Sometimes at night, I still feel the phantom pressure of that gun against my ribs. But then I remember the look on Alex's face when he held his daughter again, and I know I made the right choice. Life is full of unexpected turns. Sometimes, a late-night Uber ride can turn into a life-or-death situation. And sometimes, in the face of impossible choices, ordinary people can do extraordinary things. I never set out to be a hero. I was just a guy trying to make some extra money driving an Uber. But that night taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared to death and doing the right thing anyway. So the next time you get into an Uber, remember, every driver has a story, and you never know when you might become part of it. The first thing I noticed about Hollow Creek was the silence. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, not even the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, afraid to disturb the eerie calm. I should have turned back right then, but curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed on, unaware that I was walking into a nightmare from which I might never escape. My name's Sarah, and I'm an avid hiker. I've trekked through some of the most remote wilderness areas in the country, always seeking that next great adventure. When I heard whispers about a hidden community deep in the Appalachian Mountains, I couldn't resist the allure of exploring somewhere truly off the grid. The trail to Hollow Creek wasn't on any map. I'd pieced together directions from vague forum posts and cryptic warnings from locals who seemed reluctant to talk about the place. Those folks keep to themselves, they'd say, averting their eyes. Best leave them be. But their reticence only fueled my curiosity. What were they hiding? What secrets lay hidden in those misty mountains? The hike was grueling, the path barely visible at times as it wound through dense forest and steep ravines. By the time I caught my first glimpse of Hollow Creek, the sun was already dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The village, if you could call it that, was a collection of ramshackle cabins clustered around a central clearing. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, but I saw no other signs of life. No cars, no power lines. Nothing to suggest this place belonged to the 21st century. As I approached, the silence grew even more pronounced. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the packed dirt path. I felt eyes on me, watching from behind curtained windows. But every time I looked, I saw nothing but shadows. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast stillness. "Is anyone there?" For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, a door creaked open. An old woman emerged, her face a maze of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and wary. "You shouldn't be here, outsider," she said, her voice raspy with disuse. "This ain't a place for your kind." Before I could respond, more people began to appear. They emerged from houses, from behind trees, materializing like ghosts in the fading light. Men, women, children, all with the same guarded expression, all watching me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing unease in my gut. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'm just a hiker, and I heard about this place. I was curious." A man stepped forward, tall and lean with a beard that reached his chest. When he spoke, the others fell silent, deferring to him. "Curiosity's a dangerous thing in these parts," he said. "Brings nothing but trouble." I nodded, suddenly eager to leave. The atmosphere had shifted from merely odd to downright menacing. "I understand. I'll just be on my way then." But as I turned to go, I felt a hand on my arm. It was the old woman, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked so frail. "Can't leave now," she said. "Night's falling. Woods ain't safe after dark." The bearded man nodded. "Mabel's right. You'll stay the night. We'll see about getting you on your way in the morning." It wasn't a request. I looked around at the circle of faces, all watching me intently, and knew I had no choice. I was outnumbered, lost in unfamiliar territory. Fighting or running would be suicide. "Thank you," I managed to say, forcing a smile. "That's very kind of you." Mabel led me to her cabin, a tiny one-room affair that smelled of herbs and wood smoke. As she busied herself preparing a simple meal, I tried to engage her in conversation, to learn more about this strange, isolated community. But Mabel was tight-lipped, answering my questions with grunts or single-word responses. It was clear she had no interest in satisfying my curiosity. As night fell, the silence outside grew even more oppressive. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted. It was as if the darkness had swallowed all sound. I lay on a pallet on the floor, staring up at the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, sleep eluding me. Something about this place felt wrong, deeply and fundamentally wrong. But I couldn't put my finger on what it was. It was well past midnight when I heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting coming from somewhere outside. I crept to the window, peering out into the darkness. What I saw made my blood run cold. The entire community was gathered in the clearing, forming a circle around a large bonfire. They were swaying in unison, their voices rising and falling in a language I didn't recognize. And in the center of the circle, tied to a post, was a person. I squinted, trying to make out details in the flickering firelight. It was a man, I thought, though it was hard to be sure. He was struggling against his bonds, his mouth open in what I assumed was a scream, though I could hear nothing over the chanting. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would burst out of my chest. I had to get out of here, had to run, had to find help. But as I turned from the window, I found Mabel standing there, watching me with those sharp, knowing eyes. "Told you curiosity was dangerous," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Now you've gone and seen what you shouldn't have seen." I backed away, my mind racing. "What are you doing to that person? Who are you people?" Mabel smiled, and in that moment she didn't look frail at all. She looked ancient and terrible, a being from some primordial nightmare. "We're the keepers," she said, "have been for generations, keeping the old ways, keeping the balance." "What balance?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Between this world and the other," Mabel replied. "The hungry world that lies just beyond the veil. It needs to be fed, you see, and we feed it." The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. The missing hikers, the whispered warnings, the unnatural silence. It all made a horrible kind of sense. I lunged for the door, but Mabel was faster than she looked. Her hand shot out, fingers curling around my wrist with surprising strength. "Can't let you leave now," she said, You're part of it. Part of the feeding. I fought, struggled, but it was useless. More hands grabbed me. Strong hands belonging to the men I'd seen earlier. They dragged me out of the cabin, towards the bonfire and its terrible circle. The chanting grew louder as we approached, rising to a fever pitch. I saw the man tied to the post more clearly now. His eyes were wide with terror, pleading silently for help I couldn't give. They tied me to a second post, the rough rope biting into my skin. The bearded man approached, a cruel-looking knife in his hand. "Nothing personal," he said, almost gently. "It's just the way things have to be." As he raised the knife, the chanting reached a crescendo. And then, to my horror, the fire began to change. It grew, twisted, took on shapes that shouldn't be possible. I saw faces in the flames, hungry, inhuman faces. The veil, I realized with a jolt of terror, the veil between worlds was thinning, just as I thought all hope was lost. A sound cut through the night, a sound that didn't belong in this primal, ancient ritual. The whoop of a police siren. Chaos erupted. The chanters scattered, their circle broken. The fire collapsed in on itself, the otherworldly faces disappearing in a rush of sparks. In the confusion, I managed to work one hand free. I untied myself and the other captive, and we ran, stumbling through the dark woods, guided by the flashing lights of approaching vehicles. We emerged onto a road where several police cars and ambulances were parked. Apparently, my disappearance had been noticed, and a search party had been organized. As I sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a shock blanket, I tried to explain what I'd seen. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how insane it all sounded. The police exchanged skeptical glances, clearly not believing a word. They searched Hollow Creek, of course, but they found nothing. No evidence of a ritual, no bonfire, no captives. The cabins were empty, abandoned, as if they hadn't been lived in for years. To this day, I don't know if what I experienced was real, or some sort of shared hallucination brought on by fear and isolation. But sometimes, when I'm hiking and the woods grow quiet, I remember Hollow Creek. I remember the chanting, the fire, the hungry faces in the flames. And I run, leaving curiosity behind, knowing that some secrets are better left undiscovered. The day I found the blood-stained journal in Mark's desk drawer, I knew my coworker was hiding something sinister. But I never imagined it would lead me down a rabbit hole of obsession, stalking, and a fight for my own survival. I'd been working at Pinnacle Marketing for about 6 months when Mark joined our team. At first, he seemed like any other new hire. A bit quiet, maybe, but friendly enough. We'd chat by the coffee machine, exchange small talk about weekend plans. Normal stuff. But there was always something off about Mark. The way his eyes would linger a bit too long when he looked at you. How he'd appear out of nowhere in the break room, as if he'd been waiting. I brushed it off as social awkwardness. Nothing more. Then came the day I needed to borrow a stapler. Mark was out to lunch, so I figured I'd just grab it from his desk and leave a note. That's when I saw it. A corner of leather-bound book peeking out from a half-open drawer. I don't know what made me pull it out. Curiosity, intuition, whatever it was. That moment changed everything. The journal was old, the pages yellowed and dog-eared. And on those pages, in meticulously neat handwriting, were details of people's lives, their routines, their habits, their vulnerabilities, all recorded with an obsessive attention to detail that made my skin crawl. But it was the last few pages that truly horrified me. They were spattered with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. I shoved the journal back in the drawer, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A prop for a novel Mark was writing. Maybe. But deep down, I knew this was real. And Mark was dangerous. For the next week, I watched him like a hawk. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. How he always seemed to know where everyone was in the office. The way he'd casually ask about people's families, their schedules, their fears. He was gathering information. But for what? I debated going to HR, or even the police. But what could I say? I snooped in my coworker's desk and found a creepy journal. I had no proof, no concrete evidence of any crime. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started investigating on my own. I wish I hadn't. Late one night, I stayed at the office after everyone had left. With shaking hands, I picked the lock on Mark's desk. "Thank you, misspent youth," and retrieved the journal. This time, I read it cover to cover. What I found chilled me to my core. The journal wasn't just about our co-workers. It contained entries dating back years, detailing the lives of dozens of people. Some entries ended abruptly, with a single red line drawn through the name. And then I saw my name. The last entry, my routines, my habits, even conversations I'd had in private, all recorded in that neat, emotionless handwriting. I was so engrossed in reading, I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until it was too late. Curiosity killed the cat, you know. I spun around, the journal falling from my hands. Mark stood in the doorway, his usually placid face twisted into something unrecognizable. Something monstrous. Mark, I stammered, backing away. "I can't explain." "No need," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I think we both know what's happening here." He took a step forward. I took a step back. "You know," he continued, "I had such plans for you. You were going to be my masterpiece. But now," he sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. "Now I'm afraid we'll have to speed things up a bit." I saw the glint of metal in his hand. A knife. My blood turned to ice. What happened next was a blur. I remember throwing the journal at his face, using his moment of distraction to bolt past him. I remember running through the dark office, knocking over chairs, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. I remember the elevator doors closing just as Mark rounded the corner, his face a mask of fury. I ran out of the building, into the street, not stopping until I reached a busy intersection. Only then, surrounded by the comforting noise and light of the city, did I allow myself to breathe. I went straight to the police, babbling about journals and stalking and narrowly escaped murder. They were skeptical, of course, but something in my terrified demeanor must have convinced them to at least check it out. They found nothing. Mark's desk was clean, no sign of any journal. He expressed shock and concern when questioned, even suggesting that maybe I was working too hard and imagining things. I quit my job the next day, moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number, did everything I could to disappear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that Mark was still out there, watching, waiting. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, I started to relax, to think that maybe, just maybe, I had overreacted, that the whole thing had been some stress-induced hallucination. Then came the note. I found it slipped under my door one morning. A single sheet of paper, with that same neat handwriting. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" The terror came flooding back, worse than before, because now I knew the truth. Mark wasn't just some creepy co-worker with boundary issues. He was a predator, and I was his prey. I went back to the police, a note in hand. This time, they took me more seriously. They assigned a detective to the case, set up patrols in my neighborhood. But Mark was always one step ahead. More notes appeared, always in places they shouldn't have been able to reach. Inside my locked car, tucked into the book I was reading, pinned to my pillow while I slept. Each one more taunting than the last. Each one a reminder that nowhere was safe. I became a shell of myself, jumping at shadows, flinching at every sound. I lost weight, couldn't sleep. My friends worried, but I pushed them away. I couldn't risk Mark targeting them too. The detective did his best, but without hard evidence, his hands were tied. "We'll catch him," he'd assure me. Just a matter of time. But time was the one thing I was running out of. I could feel the noose tightening. Mark's game reaching its endgame. The final note was the simplest. Just 2 words: checkmate. I found it on my nightstand, along with a single red rose. The implications were clear. He had been in my bedroom while I slept. The last illusion of safety shattered. That night, I made a decision. I was done being the victim, done jumping at shadows. If this was a game to Mark, fine, I'd play, but I'd play to win. I set a trap, leaked information about a weekend trip through the grapevine at my old office, made a show of packing my car, even driving out of town. Then I doubled back, slipping into my apartment through a back entrance. And I waited. Hours passed. The sun set. The apartment grew dark. Still I waited, every nerve on high alert. Just after midnight, I heard it. The soft scrape of a lock being picked. The creak of my front door opening. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through my living room. Coming closer. My bedroom door opened. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. Surprise, I said, flicking on the lights. Mark blinked, momentarily stunned, but only for a moment. Then that familiar, terrifying smile spread across his face. "Well played," he said, sounding almost proud. "I didn't think you had it in you." "It's over, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The police are on their way." He laughed, a chilling sound. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I've been playing this game a lot longer than you have. I always have a backup plan." He reached into his jacket. I tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small remote. "One push," he said, "and this entire building goes up in flames. So many lives lost, such a tragedy, and poor, unstable you at the center of it all." My mind raced. Was he bluffing? Could I risk calling him on it? In that moment of indecision, Mark lunged. We grappled, fighting for control of the remote. I felt his fingers on my throat, squeezing. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. With the last of my strength, I brought my knee up hard. Mark gasped, his grip loosening. I twisted, breaking free, and ran. I made it to the living room before he caught me. We crashed to the floor, the remote skittering away under the couch. What happened next was a blur of fists and desperation. I fought with everything I had, knowing my life depended on it. Somehow, I ended up on top, my hands around Mark's throat. His eyes bulged, his face turning purple. Still, that manic grin never left his face. I don't know how long I held on. It felt like hours. But finally, mercifully, he went still. I collapsed beside him, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. It was over. Really, truly over. The police arrived minutes later, responding to reports of a disturbance. They found me still on the floor, unable to move, unable to speak. The investigation that followed uncovered the full extent of Mark's crimes. The journal was real, hidden in a secret compartment in his home. It led to the solving of 3 cold case murders and the prevention of who knows how many more. They called me a hero, said I'd stopped a serial killer. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt broken, violated in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever recover from. It's been a year since that night. I'd like to say I'm fully healed, that the nightmares have stopped. But that would be a lie. The truth is, I still check under my bed every night. Still flinch at unexpected noises, still wonder, in my darkest moments, if there are other Marks out there, watching, waiting. But I'm alive. I survived. And every day, I get a little stronger, a little braver. Mark took so much from me. My sense of safety, my trust, my peace of mind. But he didn't take my life. And in the end, that's the only victory that matters. The first time I heard the footsteps echoing through the empty office building, I told myself it was just my imagination. By the 3rd time, I knew I wasn't alone. What I didn't know was that my night shift was about to become a terrifying game of cat and mouse. Or I was the mouse. My name's Alex, and I've been working as a night janitor at Horizon Tower for about 6 months now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gives me time to work on my writing during the quiet hours. At least, that's what I told myself when I took the job. Horizon Tower is one of those gleaming skyscrapers that dominate the city skyline. During the day, it's a hive of activity, suits rushing to and fro, the constant hum of computers and phones. But at night, it's a different world entirely. My shift starts at 10 p.m., just as the last of the workaholics are trudging out, bleary-eyed and caffeine-deprived. I always give them a nod as I wheel in my cleaning cart, but most of them look right through me. I'm part of the invisible workforce that keeps their world running smoothly. That night started like any other. I made my rounds, floor by floor, emptying trash cans, wiping down surfaces, vacuuming carpets. The monotony of the work usually lets my mind wander, plotting out stories or daydreaming about the day I'll quit this job and become a full-time writer. But something felt off from the moment I stepped into the building. The air felt heavy, charged somehow, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the changing weather outside. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard it for the first time. I was on the 37th floor, head down as I mopped the hallway outside the executive offices. The sound echoed through the empty space, footsteps, clear as day, coming from somewhere above me. I froze, mop suspended mid-swipe. It wasn't unusual for there to be a few people working late, but this late, and I hadn't seen anyone when I did my first sweep of the upper floors. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness of the building. No response. I shook my head, forcing a chuckle. "Get it together, Alex," I muttered to myself. "You're letting your writer's imagination run wild." But as I resumed mopping, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. My eyes kept darting to the shadows at the edges of my vision, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking there. An hour later, I heard it again. This time, I was in the stairwell, lugging my cart up to the next floor. The footsteps were louder this time, echoing in the confined space. They were coming from above, getting closer. My heart began to race. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath as I listened. The steps grew louder, closer, until they sounded like they were on the landing just above me. And then, suddenly, they stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Nothing. No more footsteps. No voices. Nothing. Slowly, cautiously, I peered around the corner, looking up the stairs. Empty. Just the endless spiral of steps disappearing into the gloom above. My hands were shaking as I gripped the handle of my cart. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was in the building with me. Someone who didn't want to be seen. I thought about calling security, but what would I say? That I heard footsteps. They'd think I was crazy. No. I needed proof before I started raising alarms. I continued my rounds, but now every shadow seemed menacing. Every unexpected noise made me jump. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure looming behind me. It was nearing 3 a.m. when it happened again. I was in one of the corner offices, emptying the trash guy, when I heard a door slam somewhere down the hall. It was loud, deliberate, like someone wanting to announce their presence. My breath caught in my throat. This was my chance to catch whoever was playing these games with me. I set down my trash bag and crept towards the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. The hallway was dark, lit only by the dim glow of emergency lights. I could see that one of the office doors further down was ajar, swaying slightly as if someone had just passed through. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the building and never come back. But a strange sort of determination had taken hold. I was tired of being scared, tired of jumping at shadows. I wanted answers. I moved down the hall, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. As I neared the open door, I could hear something, A soft, rhythmic sound. Was that breathing? My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. In one quick motion, I pushed it open, flicking on the light switch as I did. The office was empty. I let out a shaky breath, relief and confusion warring within me. Had I imagined it all? Was I going crazy? That's when I saw it. On the desk, placed with deliberate care, was a single sheet of paper. My blood ran cold as I read the words written on it. I see you, Alex, do you see me? The handwriting was messy, almost childlike, but the message was clear. This wasn't my imagination. Someone was here, watching me, playing with me. I backed out of the office, my eyes darting wildly around. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, filled with shadows that could be hiding anything, or anyone. I ran. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I ran for the elevators, jabbing the call button repeatedly, desperately. But the numbers above the doors didn't move. The elevator wasn't coming. The stairwell. It was my only option. I burst through the door, taking the steps 2 at a time in my haste to get down, to get out. I was halfway between floors when the lights went out. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. I froze, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. And in that darkness, I heard it again. Footsteps, coming up the stairs towards me. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I fumbled for my phone, using its feeble light to guide me as I continued my descent. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear ragged breathing now, not just my own. I burst out of the stairwell on the ground floor, running full tilt towards the main doors. They were locked. Of course they were locked. I was the night janitor. I had locked them myself at the start of my shift. My trembling hands fought with my keyring, trying to find the right key. The footsteps were in the lobby now, slow and deliberate. They knew I had nowhere to go. Finally, mercifully, the key turned. I yanked the door open and ran out into the night, not stopping until I reached my car. As I sped away from Horizon Tower, my mind raced. Who was in there with me? What did they want? And most terrifyingly, how did they know my name? I didn't go back the next night, or the night after. I called in sick, my voice shaking as I left a message for my supervisor. When I finally worked up the courage to return a week later, everything seemed normal. No one mentioned anything unusual. The security log showed no unauthorized entries. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the building, I still hear those footsteps, still feel those eyes watching me from the shadows. And I wonder, was it all in my head? Or is the game not over, just paused, waiting to begin again? I've started looking for a new job, day shift only, because now I know the night holds secrets, and some of them are better left uncovered. The GPS said to turn right, but as my car rounded the bend, I knew something was terribly wrong. The quaint town that appeared before me wasn't on any map, and the vacant stares of its residents sent chills down my spine. Little did I know, I had just driven into a nightmare from which there might be no escape. My name's Jamie, and I'm a traveling salesperson for a pharmaceutical company. I've been on the road for years, crisscrossing the country, visiting small towns and big cities alike. I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the town of Millhaven. It was supposed to be a routine trip. I was cutting through the back roads of rural Pennsylvania, trying to shave some time off my journey to my next sales pitch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, when my GPS chirped, instructing me to take the next right. The road it led me down was narrow and winding, barely wide enough for my sedan. Thick forests pressed in on both sides, their shadows growing longer and more ominous as daylight faded. I was just starting to wonder if I should turn back when the trees suddenly gave way to open space. And there it was, Millhaven. At first glance, it looked like a picture-perfect small town, the kind you see on postcards or in old movies. White picket fences, neatly trimmed lawns, A quaint main street lined with mom and pop shops. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way the streetlights flickered to life all at once as I drove in, as if the town had been waiting for me. Or maybe it was the people. They were out and about, but their movements seemed stiff, almost mechanical. And their eyes, God, their eyes. They all turned to stare at me as I passed, vacant and glassy, like dolls' eyes. I suppressed a shudder, telling myself I was just tired from the long drive. I'd find a motel, get some rest, and be on my way in the morning. I pulled up to the only motel in town, a shabby two-story affair with a flickering neon sign. The clerk at the front desk smiled at me as I walked in, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. Those remained flat, lifeless. "Welcome to Mill Haven," he said, his voice as empty as his gaze. "How long will you be staying with us?" "Just for the night," I replied, unable to shake the growing sense of unease. "I'll be heading out first thing in the morning." The clerk's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Oh, I wouldn't be too sure about that. Folks tend to linger in Mill Haven." I laughed nervously, chalking his odd behavior up to small-town eccentricity. I took my key and headed to my room, trying to ignore the way every person I passed on the way stared at me with those unsettling, vacant eyes. The room was basic but clean. I set my alarm for early and tried to sleep, but rest wouldn't come. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Each time, they would pause outside my room for a long moment before moving on. When my alarm finally went off, I was already awake, having given up on sleep hours ago. I packed quickly, eager to put this strange town in my rearview mirror. But as I stepped outside, my heart sank. A thick, impenetrable fog had rolled in overnight. I could barely see the hood of my car, let alone the road out of town. "Nasty weather we're having," came a voice from behind me, making me jump. It was the clerk from last night, still wearing that too wide smile. "Looks like you might be staying another night after all." I mumbled something non-committal and got in my car. Fog or no fog, I was getting out of here. I turned the key in the ignition, but nothing happened. The engine was dead. Panic started to set in as I popped the hood, though I knew next to nothing about cars. As I stared helplessly at the engine, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I saw a group of townspeople had gathered, all wearing the same blank expression, all staring at me with those lifeless eyes. "Car trouble," one of them asked, his tone making it clear he already knew the answer. "Don't worry, we'll take good care of you here in Mill Haven." I backed away, my heart racing. "Thanks, but I'll just call a tow truck. I really need to get going." I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. The crowd started to move closer, their movements oddly synchronized. Now, another voice said, soothing but with an undercurrent of menace. "There's no need to leave. We have everything you need right here in Mill Haven." I ran. I didn't know where I was going in this fog-shrouded town, but I knew I had to get away from these people. Their footsteps echoed behind me, never seeming to get closer, but never falling behind either. I found myself on Main Street. The shops all open despite the early hour and the thick fog. In each window, I could see people inside, all turning to stare at me as I passed, all wearing that same vacant expression. I ducked into an alley, trying to catch my breath and figure out what to do. That's when I heard it, a voice, different from the others. It was coming from a partially open basement window. "Hey, you, new guy," the voice hissed. "In here, quick." Desperation overrode caution. I squeezed through the window, finding myself in a dimly lit basement. A man stood there, wild-eyed and disheveled, but blessedly normal-looking compared to the rest of the town. "Thank God," he said. "I thought I was the only one left." Over the next hour, huddled in that musty basement, he told me everything. His name was Mike, and he'd been trapped in Millhaven for months. He'd stopped for gas one night and never left. This town, he explained, his voice shaking. It's not natural. The people here, they're not people anymore. They're empty, and they want to make us like them. He showed me marks on his arms, like injection sites. They've been experimenting on me, he said, trying to turn me into one of them, but it hasn't worked, not yet. My blood ran cold as I remembered the contents of my sample case. Experimental drugs, not yet on the market. Was that why they were so interested in me? Mike's theory was that the town itself was some kind of trap, luring in unsuspecting travelers and changing them. But he'd found a way out. A tunnel leading beyond the town limits. We have to go now, he urged, before they find us, before they make us like them. We crept through the fog-filled streets, every shadow seeming to hide one of the vacant-eyed townspeople. Finally, we reached the entrance to the tunnel, a rusty door set into the side of a hill at the edge of town. As Mike pulled the door open, we heard shouts behind us. They'd found us. Go, Mike yelled, pushing me towards the tunnel. I'll hold them off. I hesitated, not wanting to leave him behind. But the look in his eyes was clear. This was his chance to finally do something, to save someone else from the fate he'd been fighting against for so long. With a heavy heart, I plunged into the darkness of the tunnel. Behind me, I could hear sounds of a struggle, then silence. I ran until my lungs burned, the beam of my phone's flashlight barely penetrating the gloom ahead. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I saw light. Real, natural light. I emerged from the tunnel into a sunlit forest, miles from where I'd entered Millhaven. My car was there, keys in the ignition, running smoothly as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. As I sped away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the mouth of the tunnel. A figure with vacant, glassy eyes. I never reported what happened in Millhaven. Who would believe me? Sometimes I wonder if it was all a stress-induced hallucination. But then I'll catch a glimpse of a vacant-eyed stranger in a crowd. Or I'll wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can hear distant footsteps approaching my door. And I know, deep down, that Millhaven is still out there, waiting, watching, ready to welcome its next visitor with open arms and empty eyes. I don't take shortcuts anymore. I stick to the main roads, the well-traveled paths. Because now I know, sometimes the road less traveled leads to places you can never truly leave. The moment I spotted the tiny camera hidden in the air vent, I knew this wasn't just a routine house-sitting gig. My friend's home had become a surveillance nightmare, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I never should have agreed to house-sit for Jake. We'd been friends since college, but we drifted apart over the years. When he called out of the blue, asking if I could watch his place for a week while he was on a business trip, I hesitated. But the promise of a quiet week in a luxurious house, away from my cramped apartment, was too tempting to resist. The house was everything Jake had described. A sprawling, modern mansion on the outskirts of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the surrounding forest. The kitchen was a chef's dream, and the entertainment system in the living room was state-of-the-art. For the first day, I was in heaven. I cooked elaborate meals in the gourmet kitchen, lounged by the infinity pool, and binge-watched shows on the massive TV. It was the perfect vacation. But on the second day, things started to feel off. It began with small things. I could have sworn I left a book on the coffee table, but when I came back from a swim, it was neatly placed back on the shelf. The thermostat kept changing, even though I never touched it. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination or forgetfulness. Then I noticed the sounds, tiny, almost imperceptible clicks and whirs that seemed to follow me from room to room. I told myself it was just the house settling or the high-tech appliances doing their thing. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing hour. I'd catch movements in my peripheral vision, only to turn and find nothing there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up every time I entered a new room. On the third night, unable to shake my unease, I decided to do a thorough inspection of the house. That's when I found the first camera, tucked away in the vent above the guest room bed. My blood ran cold as I realized it had a perfect view of where I'd been sleeping. Heart pounding, I began searching in earnest. They were everywhere. Tiny, sophisticated cameras hidden in light fixtures, behind picture frames, even in the shower head. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Every move I'd made since arriving had been recorded. But why? Was Jake some kind of perverted voyeur? Or was something even more sinister going on? I tried to call Jake, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with texts and emails. It was like he'd vanished off the face of the earth. Panic set in as I considered my options. I could leave, but what if Jake was in trouble? What if he wasn't the one behind this? And to be honest, a part of me was terrified of what might happen if whoever was watching realized I'd discovered their surveillance. So I made a decision. I would pretend I hadn't found anything, act normal, but try to find out what was really going on. The next day was a masterclass in forced normalcy. I smiled and waved at cameras I knew were hidden, keeping up a constant stream of banal chatter as if talking to myself. All the while, my mind was racing, trying to piece together this bizarre puzzle. I started looking for clues, anything that might explain the cameras. Jake's office seemed like the logical place to start. It was locked, but a bit of amateur lockpicking. Thanks, misspent youth got me in. The office looked normal at first glance. Desk, computer, filing cabinets. But as I dug deeper, I found oddities. A false bottom in a drawer revealed a stack of passports, all with Jake's photo but different names. A hidden safe behind a painting contained stacks of cash in various currencies. Who the hell was Jake really? As I was processing this discovery, I heard it. A car pulling up outside. Footsteps on the front porch. The sound of a key in the lock. Panic surged through me. I quickly put everything back as I'd found it and slipped out of the office. I had just made it to the living room, trying to look casual, when the front door opened. It wasn't Jake. Two men in dark suits entered, their faces impassive. They didn't seem surprised to see me. "Mr. Wheeler," one of them said, his tone flat. "We need you to come with us." My mind raced. How did they know my name? Were they with Jake? Some government agency or something worse? "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my mouth dry. "Where's Jake?" The man's expression didn't change. "Mr. Holloway is safe, but we have some questions for you." Holloway. Jake's last name was Peterson. Or at least, I thought it was. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. The second man stepped forward. "I'm afraid you don't have a choice." I saw his hand move towards his jacket, and instinct took over. I bolted. I heard shouts behind me as I ran for the back door. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I sprinted across the backyard towards the forest. I could hear them pursuing, their footsteps heavy on the grass. The trees loomed before me, offering cover. I plunged into the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face as I ran blindly forward. My lungs burned, but fear kept me moving. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the dense forest. Eventually, when my legs felt like they were about to give out, I allowed myself to slow down and listen. Silence. No sounds of pursuit. Had I lost them? Has my breathing steadied? My mind whirled with questions. Who were those men? What did they want with me? And most importantly, who the hell was Jake really? I knew I couldn't go back to the house. Whatever was going on, I was in way over my head. I needed help. Using the sun to orient myself, I started making my way towards the nearest town. It was a long, grueling hike, but finally, I saw lights in the distance. Civilization. The first thing I did was buy a burner phone. I needed to contact someone, but I was afraid to use my own phone in case it was being tracked. I called the only person I thought might be able to help, my cousin Sarah, a journalist known for her investigative reporting. "Alex," she answered, sounding confused. "Why are you calling from a strange number?" In hushed tones, I gave her a quick rundown of what had happened. To her credit, she didn't think I was crazy. "Okay," she said when I finished. "Here's what you need to do. Don't use your credit cards. Don't go home. Don't contact anyone else. I'm going to make some calls and see what I can find out. I'll call you back on this number in 2 hours. Stay safe." Those 2 hours were some of the longest of my life. I found a 24-hour diner and nursed a cup of coffee, jumping at every sound, convinced that any moment those men in suits would walk through the door. When Sarah finally called back, her voice was grim. "Alex, listen carefully," she said. "Jake isn't who you think he is. He's been on our radar for months. We suspect he's involved in some seriously shady stuff. Industrial espionage, money laundering, maybe worse. Those cameras in his house, they're not there to spy on you. They're there to protect him." My head spun. Jake, my old college buddy, a criminal mastermind. It seemed impossible. "But why involve me?" I asked. Sarah sighed. "Best guess, you were a patsy, an innocent friend whose presence would make the house look lived in, while Jake was doing God knows what. But something must have gone wrong. Maybe they thought you'd discovered something." "What do I do now?" "I have a friend in the FBI," Sarah said. "He wants to talk to you. This could be big, Alex. You might have stumbled onto something huge." The next few days were a blur of debriefings and interviews. I told my story over and over to stern-faced agents. They were particularly interested in the contents of Jake's office. Apparently, I'd found evidence they'd been searching for months. Jacob, or whatever his real name was, had vanished. The official story was that he'd fled the country, but I had my doubts. Something told me this was far from over. Weeks passed. Gradually, I was allowed to return to my normal life, albeit with some new security measures in place. The FBI assured me I was no longer in danger, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear phantom clicks and whirs. I find myself checking for hidden cameras in my own apartment. Paranoia, the agents tell me. A normal response to trauma, they say. But I know the truth now. I know that there are secrets hidden behind the most ordinary facades, that people aren't always who they seem to be, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is trust a friend. I don't house sit anymore, and I always check the vents. The first time a patient told me they saw a shadow figure in their room, I dismissed it as a hallucination. By the third time, I knew something was terribly wrong. What I didn't realize was that I was about to uncover a dark secret that would turn my night shift at Mercy Hospital into a waking nightmare. My name is Dr. Elena Reeves, and I've been working the night shift in the ER at Mercy for the past 5 years. I thought I'd seen it all. Gruesome accidents, bizarre injuries, the whole gamut of human suffering. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that week. It started on a Tuesday night, or rather, Wednesday morning around 3 a.m., the witching hour, as we often jokingly called it. That's when things tend to get weird in the ER. I was doing my rounds, checking on patients, when I heard a blood-curdling scream from room 105. I rushed in to find Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly lady admitted for pneumonia, cowering in the corner of her room. Her eyes were wide with terror, fixed on a point near the ceiling. "It's there," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "Can't you see it? The shadow man." I looked where she was pointing but saw nothing. Just the usual medical equipment and bare walls of a hospital room. I chalked it up to confusion from her meds and gently coaxed her back to bed, assuring her there was nothing there. But as I left her room, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach. The fear in Mrs. Henderson's eyes had been so real, so visceral. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time it was Mr. Reeves, no relation. a middle-aged man recovering from a minor surgery. I heard the commotion from down the hall, the sound of breaking glass and panicked yelling. When I got to his room, I found him huddled under his blankets, eyes squeezed shut, muttering something under his breath. The water pitcher lay shattered on the floor where he'd apparently thrown it. "Mr. Reeves," I said softly, approaching his bed. "What happened? Are you all right?" He peeked out from under the covers, his face pale and drawn. "The shadow," he whispered. "It was watching me. From the corner. Just standing there." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Mrs. Henderson's similar words. But again, looking around the room, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I tried to reassure Mr. Reeves, but he remained agitated. I ended up having to give him a mild sedative to help him calm down. As I updated his chart, my mind was racing. 2 patients, 2 similar stories. It could be a coincidence, I told myself. Maybe there was a logical explanation, a trick of the light, perhaps, or some shared hospital folklore spreading among the patients. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The 3rd incident was what finally convinced me that this was more than just confused patients or overactive imaginations. It happened in the pediatric ward, which always made things worse. Little Sammy, only 8 years old, had been admitted with a nasty case of appendicitis. He was recovering well, but that night, his terrified screams echoed through the ward. By the time I reached his room, 2 nurses were already there, trying to calm him down. Sammy was pressed against the headboard of his bed, pointing at the far wall with a shaking hand. "The shadow man," he sobbed. "He tried to touch me." As the nurses attempted to soothe Sammy, I found myself staring at the spot he had pointed to. For just a moment, I thought I saw something. A flicker of movement, a deeper patch of darkness. But when I blinked, it was gone. That was the turning point. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was happening in Mercy Hospital. Something that defied rational explanation. I started digging. At first, I kept it quiet, not wanting to alarm my colleagues or, God forbid, the hospital administration. I pored over patient records, looking for similar incidents. To my shock, I found dozens of cases over the past few years, all dismissed as hallucinations or night terrors. But as I dug deeper, a pattern emerged. The sightings were more frequent in certain parts of the hospital, the oldest wings, specifically, and they seemed to cluster around certain dates. It was during this research that I stumbled upon the history of Mercy Hospital. It hadn't always been a place of healing. Back in the early 1900s, the building had housed a mental asylum. The records from that time were spotty, but what I found chilled me to the bone. Reports of unethical experiments, patients dying under mysterious circumstances, and whispers of a doctor who had taken his treatments too far, delving into the occult in his quest to cure a mental illness. The doctor's name had been struck from most records, but I managed to find it in an old newspaper clipping. Dr. Elias Blackwood. The article detailed his suicide following a scandal at the asylum. He had hanged himself in his office, which, I realized with growing horror, was now room 105. Mrs. Henderson's room. As I connected the dots, the shadows in the corners of my office seemed to deepen. Was it possible? Could the malevolent spirit of Dr. Blackwood still be haunting the hospital, terrorizing patients? I knew how it sounded. If someone had suggested this to me a week ago, I would have laughed it off. But after what I'd seen, what I'd heard from the patients, I couldn't dismiss it so easily. I decided to do something that went against every scientific principle I held dear. I was going to spend the night in room 105. I told the charge nurse I was doing a sleep study, not wanting to reveal my true intentions. As night fell and the hospital quieted, I settled into the chair in the corner of the room, determined to stay awake and alert. Hours passed. The steady beep of monitors and the distant squeak of nurses on shoes on linoleum were the only sounds. My eyelids grew heavy, but I forced myself to stay awake. It was nearing 3 a.m. when it happened. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me, and I could see goosebumps rising on my arms. And then, in the corner opposite me, the shadows began to move. They coalesced, taking shape. A tall, gaunt figure emerged from the darkness. It wore an old-fashioned doctor's coat, stained and tattered. But where its face should have been, it was only a swirling void of deeper blackness. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. The figure turned towards me, and though it had no eyes, I could feel its gaze boring into me. It spoke, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Another doctor," it said. "Come to judge my work." I found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a squeak. "Who? What are you?" The shadow figure laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping against concrete. "I am the cure," it said. "The final treatment for all of humanity's ills." It began to move towards me, tendrils of darkness reaching out. "Perhaps you'd like to volunteer for my latest experiment, Doctor?" In that moment, survival instinct overcame fear. I leapt from the chair, fumbling for the light switch. As fluorescent light flooded the room, the shadow figure dissipated with an unearthly shriek. I didn't stop running until I reached the ER, gasping for breath. The startled looks from my colleagues barely registered. I knew what I had to do. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I brought in paranormal investigators, much to the chagrin of the hospital administration. But when they captured actual evidence, EVPs of that terrible rasping voice, objects moving on their own, even the most skeptical had to take notice. We learned that Dr. Blackwood's spirit was tied to the hospital, to the site of his heinous experiments and ultimate disgrace. With the help of a local medium, we performed a cleansing ritual, focusing on room 105 and the other hotspots of activity. I'll never forget the sound that echoed through the hospital that night. A howl of rage and despair as Dr. Blackwood's spirit was finally forced to move on. In the aftermath, the hospital underwent major renovations, particularly in the older wings. The administration spun it as modernization, but those of us who knew the truth understood its real purpose. The shadow sightings stopped. Patients reported feeling more at peace, recovering faster. It was as if a dark cloud had been lifted from Mercy Hospital. As for me, I still work the night shift. But now, when a patient tells me they've seen something strange, I listen. Really listen. Because I know that sometimes, the things we dismiss as impossible are all too real. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the shadows grow long, I still sometimes feel a chill down my spine. A reminder that the barrier between our world and what lies beyond is thinner than we'd like to believe. The moment I stepped into that farmhouse, I knew something was terribly wrong. The family's smiles were too wide, their hospitality too eager. But by the time I realized the true horror of my situation, it was already too late to run. It all started with a blown tire on a lonely stretch of country road. I was on my way to a business conference, taking the scenic route to clear my head before 2 days of presentations and networking. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. When I heard the telltale flap, flap, flap of a flat, I pulled over, cursing my luck. My phone showed no signal, of course, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I hadn't seen another car for miles. As I stood there wondering what to do, I saw a light in the distance. A farmhouse, set back from the road. Relief washed over me. Surely they'd have a phone I could use, or at least point me in the direction of the nearest town. I started walking, the gravel crunching under my feet, the cooling air raising goosebumps on my arms. As I got closer, I could make out more details. The house was old, paint peeling in places, but well maintained. Flower boxes hung from the windows, bursting with colorful blooms. It looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. I knocked on the door, rehearsing my plea for help in my head. After a moment, it swung open, revealing a middle-aged woman with a kind face and flour-dusted hands. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "What brings you out this way?" I explained my situation, and her face lit up with sympathy. "Oh, you poor thing. Come in, come in. We can't have you standing out in the cold." Before I knew it, I was ushered into a cozy kitchen that smelled of freshly baked bread and cinnamon. The woman, Martha, she introduced herself, sat me down at the table and bustled about, fixing me a cup of tea. "Frank," she called out, "we have a visitor." A tall, broad-shouldered man appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. His smile matched Martha's in its warmth. "Well, ain't that something? Welcome, stranger. What seems to be the trouble?" I explained again about my car, feeling a bit overwhelmed by their enthusiasm. Frank nodded sagely. "That's a real shame, but don't you worry, we'll get you sorted out. Can't do much tonight, but first thing in the morning, I'll drive you into town. The boys at the garage there will fix you right up." "Oh, but you must stay for dinner," Martha chimed in. "I've made more than enough, and it's nearly ready." I tried to demur, not wanting to impose, but they were insistent, and if I'm being honest, the thought of a home-cooked meal was far more appealing than the protein bars I had stashed in my car. As Martha set the table, more family members appeared. 2 teenage boys, lanky and shy, a girl around 10, with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, and an older man, Frank's father I assumed, who walked with a cane and had eyes that seemed to look right through me. We sat down to eat, and I have to admit, the food was delicious. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans fresh from the garden. Martha's homemade rolls were heavenly. The conversation flowed easily. The family asking me about my life, my work, my family back home. But as the meal went on, I started to notice oddities. The way they all seemed to pause before answering questions, as if waiting for a cue. How their eyes would sometimes flick to the old man at the head of the table, seeking approval. And their smiles, those wide, eager smiles that never quite reached their eyes. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just tired and stressed from my car trouble. These were kind people who had opened their home to a stranger. I was being paranoid. After dinner, Frank showed me to the guest room. "You get some rest now," he said, that same fixed smile on his face. "We'll head into town first thing in the morning." I thanked him and settled in for the night. The room was quaint with floral wallpaper and a patchwork quilt on the bed. But as I lay there trying to sleep, that feeling of wrongness crept back in. The house was too quiet. No creaks of settling wood, no distant sounds of traffic. Just utter, complete silence. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to a sound, a soft shuffling outside my door. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. The shuffling stopped, right outside my room. I held my breath, straining to hear. Was it just one of the family members getting a glass of water? But no one moved away. They just stood there, silent, for what felt like hours. Finally, I heard retreating footsteps. I let out a shaky breath, telling myself I was imagining things. But sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. Morning came, gray and overcast. I made my way downstairs, expecting to find the family bustling about. Instead, the house was empty. A note on the kitchen table caught my eye. "Gone to tend the fields. Help yourself to breakfast. Frank." Something about the handwriting struck me as odd. It was too perfect, too uniform, like it had been printed rather than written. I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when I saw it. A flash of movement outside the window. I looked up, and my blood ran cold. The old man was standing in the yard, staring directly at me. But it wasn't his presence that terrified me. It was his eyes. In the harsh morning light, I could see that they were completely black. No whites, no iris. Just endless, fathomless darkness. I stumbled back, my mug slipping from my fingers and shattering on the floor. When I looked again, he was gone. Heart pounding. I knew I had to get out of there. I ran for the front door, only to find it locked. Not just locked, sealed, as if it had never been meant to open at all. Panic rising, I tried the windows. All of them sealed shut. I was trapped. I ran from room to room, searching for a way out, for some explanation. That's when I started noticing other things. Photos on the walls that looked wrong. The same smiling faces, but with subtle differences. A scar that appeared and disappeared. Eyes that changed color. In what I assumed was the boy's room, I found stacks of newspapers, but every date was wrong. Some from 50 years in the future, others from a century ago. The girl's room was filled with dolls. Hundreds of them, all with the same blank stare and too wide smile I'd seen on the family's faces. In the basement, I found something that made my blood run cold. A wall covered in photos, missing person posters, hundreds of them, going back decades. And in the center, a map with red pins stuck all over it. One of those pins, I realized with growing horror, marked the exact spot where my car had broken down. This wasn't a chance encounter. They had been waiting for me, luring people in for God knows what purpose. As that realization hit me, I heard the front door open. Footsteps moving through the house. That same shuffling sound I'd heard in the night. "Oh, visitor," Martha's voice called out, sickly, sweet. "Where are you? It's time for your next meal." I pressed myself into a corner of the basement, desperately looking for a weapon, an escape route. Anything. But I knew, deep down, that it was too late. I was part of their collection now. Another face to add to their wall of the missing. The basement door creaked open. Footsteps on the stairs. And as the family appeared, their faces now twisted into grotesque parodies of human smiles, I realized the true horror of my situation. This wasn't just about being trapped in a house with some backwoods killers. This was something older, something darker, something that wore the skin of a normal family, like an ill-fitting suit, luring in unsuspecting travelers for purposes I couldn't even begin to fathom. As they closed in around me, their eyes now all showing that same endless blackness, I had one last coherent thought. I should have just waited with my car. The first time I heard the strange noises coming from Unit 217, I dismissed it as the usual creaks and groans of an old storage facility. But when I saw the pale, emaciated hand reaching out from under the door, I realized I had stumbled upon something far more terrifying than forgotten junk. My name's Mike, and I've been working the night shift at Secure Store Self-Storage for about 6 months now. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills and gives me plenty of quiet time to work on my novel. At least, that's what I told myself when I took the job. Secure Store is one of those massive warehouse-style buildings on the outskirts of town, row after row of identical metal doors stretching as far as the eye can see. During the day, it's a hive of activity. People coming and going, loading and unloading their life's possessions. But at night, it's a different world entirely. My shift starts at 10 p.m., just as the last of the day's customers are leaving. I do my rounds, check the security cameras, and then settle in for a long night of writing and occasional patrols. Most nights, the only sounds are the hum of fluorescent lights and the tap-tap-tap of my laptop keys. But about a month ago, things started to change. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it. A soft, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere deep in the facility. At first, I thought it might be a faulty air conditioning unit, or maybe a customer had left something precariously balanced. But as I followed the sound, I realized it was coming from a specific unit. 217. I pressed my ear against the cold metal door, listening intently. The thumping had stopped, replaced by what sounded like scratching, as if something inside was trying to claw its way out. A chill ran down my spine. I knew I should open the unit and check it out. It was part of my job, after all. But something held me back. An instinct, maybe. Or just plain old fear. I convinced myself it was probably just a rat that had somehow gotten trapped inside. I made a mental note to call pest control in the morning and went back to my desk, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. But the sounds continued, night after night. Sometimes it was that rhythmic thumping, other times, scratching. And once I swear I heard what sounded like muffled sobbing. I started avoiding that section of the facility during my rounds. I told myself it was because I didn't want to disturb whatever animal had made its home in there. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was scared. About a week after the noises started, I noticed something else. The keypad for Unit 217 was blinking red. That usually meant someone had tried to access it with the wrong code too many times, but when I checked the logs, there were no failed attempts recorded. It was as if the unit itself was trying to tell me something was wrong. I should have reported it then. Should have called my manager or the police or someone. But I didn't. Because by that point, I was too curious, too invested in solving this mystery on my own. So I started digging. I looked up the records for Unit 217, expecting to find it registered to some local business or maybe a family that had moved away. What I found instead made my blood run cold. The unit had been rented 6 months ago by a man named John Doe, an obvious fake name. The phone number provided was disconnected, the address, a vacant lot on the other side of town. Whoever had rented this unit had gone to great lengths to remain anonymous. And that's when I started to really worry about what might be inside. My imagination ran wild. Was it stolen goods, drugs, or something even worse? Each possibility seemed more horrifying than the last. I knew I should leave it alone, call the cops and let them deal with it. But something kept pulling me back to that unit. A morbid fascination, maybe. Or maybe just the writer in me, hungry for a good story. It all came to a head last night. I was doing my final rounds before the end of my shift when I heard it. A voice, weak and muffled, coming from Unit 217. Help. Please, help me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This was no animal. This was a person. Someone was trapped inside that unit. I ran to the office, fumbling with the master key with shaking hands. As I raced back to the unit, 1,000 scenarios played out in my mind. Had someone been kidnapped? Locked in there as some sick joke? Or was this all an elaborate trap? As I reached the unit, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pale, skeletal hand was reaching out from under the door, fingers scrabbling weakly at the concrete floor. I hesitated for just a moment, fear and duty warring within me. Then I took a deep breath and slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open, and the smell hit me like a physical force. The stench of decay, of unwashed bodies, of human waste. I gagged, fighting the urge to vomit. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw them. People. At least a dozen, maybe more. Emaciated, pale as ghosts, their eyes wide and unblinking in the sudden light. They were chained to the walls, to each other, a tangle of human misery. I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of nightmare. But the hand that grabbed my ankle was all too real. I looked down to see one of the captives, a young woman with matted hair and hollow cheeks, staring up at me with desperate eyes. Please, she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Help us. I don't really remember what happened next. I know I called 911, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I'd found. I know the police arrived, then ambulances, the night exploding into a chaos of flashing lights and shouted orders. I sat on the curb, wrapped in a shark blanket, watching as the victims were brought out one by one. Some could walk, leaning heavily on the paramedics. Others had to be carried, their bodies too weak from months of captivity. The detectives questioned me for hours. How long had I known? Why didn't I report the noises earlier? I told them everything, feeling a mixture of guilt and relief with each word. It's been 3 days since that night. The story is all over the news now. Storage unit horror, they're calling it. Apparently, it was a human trafficking ring. The unit was a temporary holding area before the victims were to be moved out of the country. They caught the guy who rented the unit. John Doe turned out to be a local businessman, someone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. The kind of monster that hides in plain sight. I've been hailed as a hero in some of the reports. The night watchman who uncovered the horrific crime. But I don't feel like a hero. All I can think about are those people, trapped in darkness and despair for months while I sat just a few hundred feet away, too scared to investigate a strange noise. I quit my job at Secure Store. I couldn't bear to walk those halls again, knowing what had happened there. The novel I was working on sits unfinished on my laptop. Somehow, crafting fictional horror seems pointless now that I've seen the real thing up close. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still hear those sounds. The thumping, the scratching, the muffled cries for help. I don't think I'll ever stop hearing them. I've learned something from all this. Something I think everyone needs to know. When you hear something strange, something that doesn't quite fit, don't ignore it. Don't explain it away. Because sometimes, behind those strange noises, there's real horror and real people who need help. F. The storage unit door is closed now. The victim's freed. But I can't help but wonder, how many other units are out there? How many other dark secrets are hiding behind those anonymous metal doors? And who will be brave enough to open them? The moment I opened that dusty old diary hidden in the attic, I knew I had unleashed something that could never be contained again. The yellowed pages held dark secrets that should have remained buried, and now I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making. My name is Sarah, and I'm a writer. I've always dreamed of owning an old country house to inspire my novels. When I saw the ad for a Victorian mansion on sale for a surprisingly low price, I didn't hesitate. I should have known better. The house was beautiful, with its dark wood panels and stained glass windows. But from day one, something felt off. The rooms were too cold, the shadows too deep, and at night, I could swear I heard footsteps upstairs, even though I was alone. It was during an exploration of the dusty attic that I found the diary. It was hidden behind a loose board, as if someone had tried to conceal it in a hurry. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. I started reading, fascinated. It was the diary of a young woman named Elizabeth, who had lived in the house in the late 19th century. At first, the entries were typical teenage stuff, gossip about friends, complaints about parents. But as I read on, the tone changed. Elizabeth began writing about strange visions, figures in the shadows. She spoke of an evil presence in the house, something that watched her, that whispered in her ear when she was alone. Her accounts became increasingly frantic, paranoid. The last entry chilled my blood. In shaky handwriting, Elizabeth wrote, "He's here. I can't run anymore. God have mercy on my soul." I closed the diary, my heart racing. It was just the delusion of a troubled teenager, I told myself. Nothing more. But that night, the noises started. Not just footsteps now, but scratches on the walls, unintelligible whispers. Shadows moved in the corners of my eyes, disappearing when I looked directly at them. I began researching the history of the house, desperate for answers. What I discovered horrified me. Elizabeth wasn't the only one who had suffered here. Over the years, the house had been the scene of mysterious deaths, unexplained disappearances, always young women, always alone. I tried to leave, to run, but the house wouldn't let me. Doors locked themselves, windows wouldn't break. I was trapped, just as Elizabeth had been over a century ago. Now I'm writing this in my own diary, hoping someone will find it one day and understand. The presence is getting stronger, bolder. I can feel it approaching as I write these words. If you're reading this, run, flee this house and never look back. Because some stories shouldn't be told, some secrets should remain buried. And some houses never let us go. Days have passed since I wrote those first frantic words. Or maybe it's been weeks. Time seems to blur here, the hours stretching endlessly in this prison of wood and stone. I've tried everything to escape. I've thrown chairs at windows only to watch them bounce off unscathed. I've screamed for help until my voice gave out, but no one ever comes. It's as if the house exists in its own pocket of reality, cut off from the outside world. The diary has become my lifeline, my only connection to sanity in this madness. I read Elizabeth's entries over and over, looking for clues, for some way to end this. But all I find is a reflection of my own growing terror. The presence in the house grows stronger every day. It's no longer content with whispers and shadows. Now it takes form, a dark figure that stands at the foot of my bed at night, watching me with eyes that burn like embers. Sometimes, in my more lucid moments, I wonder if I'm going mad. If this is all just some vivid hallucination brought on by stress or isolation. But then I feel its cold touch on my skin, hear its raspy breath in my ear, and I know this is all too real. I've started to see flashes of the past, visions of Elizabeth, of other women who lived and died here. Their terror, their despair, it all bleeds into my own until I can't tell where their experiences end and mine begin. There are moments when the house seems almost alive. The walls pulse like a heartbeat. The floorboards creak in patterns that almost sound like words. It's trying to communicate, I think. But what is it trying to say? I've taken to carrying the diary with me everywhere I go. It's the only thing that feels real anymore. The only proof that I'm not alone in this nightmare. Elizabeth's words have become a mantra, a lifeline to cling to in my darkest moments. Last night, I woke to find myself in the attic. Though I have no memory of climbing the stairs, the diary lay open in front of me, but the pages were blank. As I watched, words began to appear, written by an invisible hand. Join us, Sarah. Become part of the house. It's the only way to end the pain. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding, but the words had burned themselves into my mind. Was this the answer? The way to finally escape this torment? No, I can't think like that. I have to hold on to hope, onto my sense of self. If I give in, if I let the house take me, I'll be lost forever. But oh, how tempting it is to let go, to surrender to the darkness, to become one with the shadows that haunt these halls. Would it really be so bad to never feel fear or pain again? I can feel the house's influence growing stronger, its will seeping into my thoughts. It whispers promises of peace, of an end to loneliness. All I have to do is say yes. All I have to do is let go. My hand shakes as I write these words. I don't know how much longer I can resist. The house is patient, but its hunger is endless. It has waited for centuries. It can wait a little longer. To whoever finds this diary, please, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't let curiosity override your common sense. Some doors should remain closed. Some secrets should stay buried. The house is calling me now. I can hear it in the creaking of the floorboards, in the whistling of the wind through cracks in the walls. It's time, it says, time to become one with us. I don't want to go. I want to live, to see the sun again, to feel the grass under my feet. But I'm so tired, so very tired. If there's any mercy in this world, let this diary be found. Let my story be told. Let someone know what happened to Sarah Collins, the writer who bought a house and found a hell. And if you're reading this, if you've somehow found your way into this cursed place, heed my final warning. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Because once the house has chosen you, it never lets go. The shadows are growing longer now, reaching for me with inky tendrils. I can feel the house's heartbeat in my own chest, its whispers drowning out my thoughts. I'm sorry. I tried to resist. I really did. But in the end, the house always wins. Always. The pen falls from my hand. The diary closes for the last time. And as the darkness engulfs me, as I feel myself becoming one with the very walls that imprisoned me, I have one last coherent thought. Some stories have no happy endings. Some houses keep their secrets forever. And now, I am one of those secrets.